Chapter 3. Even Cedric Diggory flinched at the chilling preface of that spell. Crucio, an unforgivable curse. But Karpov had only mimed a sinister gesture he never meant to follow through. Confringo, a blazing yellow light thundered toward Cedric. His mind was still stuck on the terrifying syllables. His body reacted a beat too slow. A collective scream rose from the stands, and time seemed to slow. Just as the destructive beam was about to engulf him, the fear in Cedric's eyes snapped into hard, focused resolve. He cast aside thoughts of dodging or defending. All his will, all his magic, even his instinct to survive, compressed into a single razor-sharp intention. Apparition! A split second before the blast hit, his figure vanished from his place. The next moment, he reappeared at the far end of the arena. The crowd erupted. Merlin, what was that? Apparition, he's only in 4th year. Even Percy Weasley gaped. This apparition was a 6th-year advanced subject. Legally, a student had to be at least 17 and pass a strict test to perform it. The spell was notoriously difficult, and the risk of splinching was terrifying. Yet Cedric had thrown himself into it in the middle of a duel. Karpov's sneer froze. He hadn't expected that. But Cedric didn't hesitate. The moment he cleared the light, his counterattack erupted. His wand, driven by a single unstoppable motion, lashed out before he'd fully steadied. Stupefy. A brilliant red bolt like a cannonball shot from his wand. The whoosh of the spell slammed into Karpov's broad chest. The Durmstrang's 7th year's burly form flew backward, crashing nearly 5 meters before hitting the ground with a metallic clang. The arena fell into stunned silence. All eyes were on the Hufflepuff 4th year on the platform. He still held his casting posture, chest heaving, breaths coming hard. Across from him, the previously arrogant Durmstrang student lay crumpled. A white glow, the sign of defeat, already shimmered around him. Kestrel was the first to break the silence, voice cracking with excitement. Unbelievable! Cedric Diggory has defeated Paro Karpov. Hogwarts wins. The stands erupted into thunderous applause. Even Slytherins couldn't help cheering for the comeback. Cedric straightened slowly. He glanced at the wand clenched in his hand, at Karpov where he lay, then out at the sea of faces below. He had really done it, used a spell he'd only practiced in private, still rough at it, and triumphed over a powerful opponent. It made sense now. The arena was wrapped in powerful protective enchantments. They kept injuries from becoming catastrophic and provided an invisible safety net when someone cast an unstable, dangerous charm. With so many professors watching, the risk of anything truly severe was small. In that moment, winning or losing felt less terrifying. Cedric stepped down from the dueling platform, his legs still a little unsteady. He glanced toward the Durmstrang section. Victor Crumb stood with his arms crossed, eyes fixed on him, then gave a slow nod. Cedric smiled casually, then looked to the professor's table. Professor Sprout waved with a broad grin. Professor Lumina whistled enthusiastically. The others were smiling and clapping. The top 3 contenders for the Triwizard Tournament had been decided. Fleur Delacour of Beauxbatons, Victor Krum of Durmstrang, and Cedric Diggory of Hogwarts, each school winning a place. Strangely, none of them were 7th years. At noon, on Dumbledore's announcement, the competition paused. Students poured onto the vine-woven suspension bridge and made their way to the Great Hall for lunch. A few daring boys deliberately rocked and jumped on the bridge, sending their more acrophobic classmates into shrieks. Before any professor could scold them, the bridge itself sent several flexible vines lashing out and smacked the pranksters on the legs and backs with sharp whacks, producing laughter and exaggerated cries. Surprisingly, the mood among the 3 schools was unusually friendly. Even the normally grim Durmstrang students wore rare smiles and chatted freely. Honestly, Justin Finch Fletchley of Hufflepuff said to a Durmstrang boy beside him as they walked, "That big guy of yours was nasty. He ambushed him and cheated. Cedric almost fell for it." "That's a legitimate dueling tactic," the Durmstrang boy replied bluntly, his accent thick and his tone frank. "Not an ambush, preemption. Once the nod was given, the duel had already begun." Justin's eyes widened. "You all really think that?" Several Durmstrang boys nodded as if it were obvious. Justin was momentarily speechless. A clear voice cut in, "Constant vigilance." Susan Bones pushed her glasses up, serious. "What?" Justin asked, puzzled. "Constant vigilance. That's the catchphrase of the legendary Auror Mad-Eye Moody, Susan explained. I've met him a few times at my aunt's house. Your aunt is? Someone asked. Amelia Bones, Susan said with a hint of pride, head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. The Auror office is under her jurisdiction. Students nearby, especially those from Hufflepuff and Gryffindor, turned to look at her with new respect. They might not know the exact structure of the Ministry of Magic, but head of department sounded important. Surely more prestigious than Filch's Castle Caretaker title. Speaking of which, that Cedric Diggory from your school is astonishing, a Beauxbatons girl with curly hair and bright eyes added as she joined the group. Is he really only in 4th year? He looks like a 6th. And he's really handsome. Cho Chang of Ravenclaw and her friend Marietta Edgecombe passed by, and Cho whispered that last bit with a giggle, covering her mouth with her hand as they shared the excitement. Dumbledore had been called to London by the Ministry of Magic, and before he left, he put Professor McGonagall in charge of presiding over the duels. Lunch in the Great Hall ended in a buzz of excitement. No sooner had the scents of honey-roasted ham and pumpkin juice faded than the students surged back toward the dueling arena, the stands filling faster than that morning. After the morning's thrilling bouts and the inter-school exchanges at lunch, everyone seemed more relaxed. Many carried treacle tarts and chocolate puddings filched from the Great Hall, or butterbeer, amicably negotiated from the house elves. Through the aisles, 2 figures in wizarding robes, both with flaming red hair, threaded like fish through the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, don't miss out, Fred Weasley bellowed, cutting through the noise. Weasley twins proudly present duel-watching snacks. George seized the moment and held up a tray of colorful vials and oddly shaped sweets. Refreshing Dragon's Breath peppermints, guaranteed to make your eyesight sharper than crumbs. Only 3 sickles. Waterproof, damp-proof, boredom-proof rainbow popcorn. Watch the match come rain or shine. A large bag for 5 sickles. And our exclusive instant class skipping sweets, dual watching edition. Guaranteed to let you slip away smoothly when you're bored. When you need to step out briefly. Only 7 sickles. Limited stock. Hurry. Their shouting drew laughter, and business was brisk. Many students couldn't resist, coins changing hands as the air filled with the strange sense of sweets. Only the dual-watching edition of the instant class skipping sweets didn't sell a single one. After all, a duel wasn't class, and as long as it wasn't class, the students were happy to stay. Just as the top 3 contestants were preparing to enter and the audience munched expectantly, the sky darkened. Heavy clouds, as if hauled in by an unseen hand, rolled over the arena. Cold drops began to pelt the stands and the faces of those in the front rows. "Oh no," someone wailed. "My new robes," a girl cried. "Damn it, rainbow popcorn can't actually survive a downpour." George's face fell as he inspected the dampened packaging. "Don't worry, old chap," Fred said, clumsily muttering a waterproof charm over the tray with a mischievous grin. "The label never promised stormproof. Rain or shine is an artistic exaggeration, you understand? Not false advertising. Merlin help you if you have to convince Madame Pomfrey of that twisted logic if anyone gets an upset stomach from soggy popcorn," George grumbled, beginning to cast counter-charms. Complaints rose all around. The rain quickened from scattered drops to a torrential sheet, pounding the protective shield and the stand's roofs with a staccato of splashes. Small puddles formed on the arena floor. Fleur frowned and brushed water from her shoulder. Crumb stayed impassive, a flash of annoyance in his eyes. Cedric was the worst off, drenched, working at rain from his face as droplets ran from his chin. Everyone in the stands hunched down, wrapping robes around themselves or shoving further under the overhang. Snack wrappers went soggy and stuck to hands. The twins cursed the weather as they frantically reapplied waterproof charms to their goods. At this time of year, the Black Lake had only recently thawed, and a sharp chill lingered in the air. The wind across the arena made the soaked students shiver and hug themselves. "Quiet! Quiet!" Professor McGonagall's stern voice rang out through a sonorous charm, but it barely carried over the rain and the chaos. In the middle of the uproar, Sagres finally set his teacup down. He didn't stand. He simply drew his wand from an inner pocket and pointed it casually into the air toward the noisy crowd. Silence. A clear, steady voice spread instantly, cutting through every sound. The arena fell into a sudden hush. Some students still mouthed words, but no sound came out. All that remained was the steady, oppressive patter of rain on roof and shield. Sagres lifted his head and, through the curtain of rain, fixed his gaze on the churning mass of clouds. There was no elaborate incantation, no dramatic flourish, just a slow, angled point of his wand. A thread of bright spell light shimmered up into the sky. A powerful ripple of magic ran through the clouds like waves across a pond. Then, as if an invisible hand swept through the heavens, the dark clouds tore apart and scattered. The rain seemed to pause, its lines breaking midair, and the arena and stands, still glistening, were suddenly bathed in warm sunlight. The dampness felt as though it had been wrung out by magic. The air turned fresh and carried the faint, clean smell of grass after a shower. The whole change happened in seconds. What had been a downpour was now a clear, sunlit sky. For a stunned moment, everyone stared at the blue above, then at their instantly dry robes and the ground beneath them, as if the rain had been a shared hallucination. Then the silence broke into deafening cheers and applause, louder and more fervent than anything before. Merlin's beard! How did he do that? Is that a weather charm? Is it really a weather charm? Professor Greengrass! That's incredible! Students shrieked and stared at Sagres with open adoration. Even the Beauxbatons and Durmstrang pupils were whispering. Some of the Beauxbaton students realized then that Professor Greengrass, while known for transfiguration, had talents in many other areas of magic. Quiet, Sagres said again. This time he didn't use a spell. He let a look sweep the crowd, and the noise fell away. He muttered to himself under his breath, "Let the match start soon. There's a bronze feather gathering tonight." Then he put his wand away, calm and unperturbed. He didn't watch the crowd's reaction. He simply gave Professor McGonagall a slight nod. She, too, looked surprised, but quickly regained her composure. "Please continue, Professor McGonagall," Sagres said. And McGonagall pursed her lips, then gave the students her usual stern expression. Glancing around at their wide-eyed faces, she said dryly, "The weather's fine. Let the match begin." At her words, the names Fleur and Krum appeared on the stone tablet, and the two stepped forward toward the stage to sustained applause and cheers. 143. Krum after Sagres's weather control, the dueling arena buzzed again with a joyous atmosphere. The sun warmed the dry stage, the crowd's faces still glowed with excitement, but every eye was fixed on the two contestants at the center. Fleur Delacour, Beauxbaton's jewel, stood tall, silver hair gleaming in the light, a magnificent wand at her side, her expression sharp and composed. Opposite her, Victor Krum of Durmstrang was a silent mountain, hawk-like eyes set deep, a burly frame coiled with explosive power. Kestrel, hardly able to contain her excitement after witnessing Sagres's near-miraculous weather magic, had persuaded Professor McGonagall, against the principal's slight suspicion, to let her introduce the match with more enthusiasm. So, at McGonagall's calm announcement of the contestants, Kestrel's deliberately passionate voice echoed through the arena. "Ladies and gentlemen, the final round of the Triwizard Dueling Tournament, Match 1, Fleur Delacour of Beauxbatons versus Victor Krum of Durmstrang." The two stood before the stone tablet. With confirmation from both sides, the arena's scene shifted into a magnificent great hall. Giant crystal chandeliers descended from the dome, and several stone pillars rose in the center. The rumble of the falling tablet had barely died away when Krum made his move, decisive, without showmanship. His wand shot out like a strike from a snake, leaving only an afterimage. Stupefy! A dazzling red beam tore through the air, aimed squarely at Fleur. The speed and force exceeded anything he had shown before. He was holding nothing back. Fleur's pupils tightened. Gracefully, she leapt backward and left, choosing evasion over a direct counter, Beauxbaton's elegance turning into nimble agility. The red light grazed her silver hair, struck the protective barrier at the arena's edge, and shivered into ripples. "So fast," Hermione breathed. Fleur steadied herself and traced an arc with her wand, chanting a Latin rhythm that was clear and melodious, with an oddly beguiling quality. No single beam issued from her wand. Instead, a swarm of dreamlike pink butterflies poured forth, drifting and then converging on Krum. Several Beauxbaton students brightened at once. Krum felt the world warp. Fleur's image blurred and burned with allure, as if she were the most precious thing in the room. An impulse rose in him to drop his wand. "Will interfering magic," Percy warned, arms folded. "If you haven't learned occlumency, this could be dangerous." Crumb only grunted. A fierce light flared in his deep-set eyes. He bit the tip of his tongue. The sting and the fierce, instinctive resistance shattered the enchantment. His bewildered look cleared and grew harder. "Protego!" A solid silver shield sprang up. Fleur unleashed a second wave. Scorching fireballs slammed into the shield and vanished. Then ice-blue beams, cold and precise, snaked around the shield's edge and struck at the stone beneath Crumb's feet. Crack! The slab beneath him became a sheet of glassy ice. Crumb's feet slid. Even with his remarkably stable stance, his balance broke and he staggered backward. "Good opportunity," Cedric called from the stands. He knew Crumb's strength, and any chance to knock him off balance was priceless. Fleur's eyes flashed triumph. Her wand didn't falter. She aimed at the off-balance Crumb. "Stoop," she never finished. As Crumb stumbled, his extraordinary physical coordination, seasoned by years as a seeker, showed. Instead of fighting for his footing, he used his momentum to roll sideways with an awkward, astonishingly quick motion. His wand flicked up from an impossible angle. Confringo. Not aimed at Fleur, but at a nearby stone pillar supporting the great hall. Boom! The pillar exploded. Huge chunks of rock and a shockwave hurled toward Fleur like shrapnel. He'd used the environment to create a localized storm of debris, an unconventional, brutal tactic. Snape, watching from the professor's section, narrowed his eyes. Something like admiration crossed his face. Crumb's move echoed one he had used in the exhibition match. "Watch out!" Beauxbatons erupted. Fleur's face went serious. She broke off the stoop-fi and redirected her wand. "Protego?" A translucent barrier. Bang, bang, bang! The debris slammed into it. Though the shield held, the impacts made it flicker, and Fleur was shoved back 2 steps, her concentration shaken. Crumb used the moment to drive his feet into the ice that had frozen under him. The confringo blasted the surface open, removing that immediate hazard. Then, without pausing, he lifted his wand and aimed high. Bombarda Maxima! A thick yellow beam struck the base of the enormous magical ice crystal chandelier that hung in the great hall. Boom! Crack! The chandelier shattered, and a rain of ice shards and massive fragments plummeted toward the arena, covering almost half of it. Sunlight fractured through the shards into a dazzling, deadly cascade. "Oh my goodness!" The crowd gasped. It was a suicidally wide attack, forcing Fleur to either endure it, expend vast magic to defend a broad area, or try to escape, each choice fraught with risk. On the Quidditch pitch, Crumb was known for ruthless, precise destruction, forces that made opponents destroy themselves. He was a master of turning chaos into opportunity. Fleur's training showed. She didn't try to block the entire chandelier. Her wand flicked in a rapid staccato. Incantations spilled from her like a machine gun. "Wingardium Leviosa," she cried. "Petrificus Totalis," she added. "No, full-body bind curse. Glacius." The levitation charm took hold of the sharp, falling shards. The full-body bind curled into light ribbons that wrapped larger fragments in the chandelier frame, altering their landing points. The glacius froze the ground Crumb might charge across, making it an even more treacherous sheet of ice. The maneuvers were fluid and instant. The chandelier's main bulk crashed down a short distance behind her, scattering harmless debris, while the most dangerous fragments were neutralized. But Crumb did not stop. Amid the explosion and flying ice, he moved like a stalking leopard. Ignoring Fleur's newly formed ice trap, he pushed off with astonishing power, stepping onto the smooth surface, using core strength and seeker balance to skate forward, the ice cracking beneath his thrusts. In the blink of an eye, the distance closed. Fleur glimpsed him charging like a bull. Alarm rang through her. She had only time for a hurried banishing charm. The small levitated crystals she had controlled lunged at Crumb, but he did not flinch. He raised an arm to shield his eyes, letting the sharp crystals rake his body. Blood splashed from cuts. Then, Expelliarmus, Crumb's voice was cold. A concentrated scarlet bolt struck Fleur's hastily assembled barrier. It shattered like glass. The impact not only broke her defense, but sent her wand flying. The pearl-tipped wand arced high and landed amid debris at the arena's edge. Fleur Delacour stood frozen, breathing shallowly. She looked at her empty hand, then at Crumb, who stood steady, wand trained on her. A flicker of unwillingness passed through her blue eyes. Then she bowed her head and conceded. Crumb lowered his wand slowly, chest rising and falling. He showed no visible elation, only a slight nod, and in a low, husky voice said simply, "You lost." A beat of silence, then the Durmstrang stand exploded in thunderous cheers. Kestrel's voice cracked with exhilaration. Unbelievable. Victor Crumb seized that fleeting chance. A perfect sneak attack. He defeated Fleur Delacour. Durmstrang takes the first round. Beauxbatons was crestfallen. Karkaroff smiled, satisfied. Madame Maxime shook her head, but her gaze toward Crumb held approval. Fleur drew a deep breath to steady herself, then gave an impeccable Beauxbatons curtsy. Her voice was calm, but with the faintest tremor. "Brilliant tactics, Mr. Crumb. I underestimated your ability to create chaos and seize opportunity." She walked to retrieve her wand, her steps heavier than when she had entered. Cedric, watching from the contestant area, studied Crumb, godlike on the stage, his palms sweaty. Crumb's strength was more than power and speed. It was a fierce instinct for finding tactical openings in chaos and the ruthless execution of those opportunities. Kestrel seized the moment. "Ladies and gentlemen, after a short break, we will welcome today's second duel. Hogwarts' contestant Cedric Diggory will challenge the terrifyingly powerful Victor Crumb. Let us wait." The brief respite vanished in an instant. Cedric stood at the entrance to the competitor's passage, taking a deep breath to calm his pounding heart. In his mind, Victor Crumb's cold strike that had felled Fleur kept replaying, the opponent's rock-like will and terrifying balance lingering there. Amid the roar of the crowd, Cedric and Crumb stepped into the arena together. Cedric stood ramrod straight, a gentle but resolute expression on his face, classically Hufflepuff. He had neither Fleur's magical creature bloodline nor Crumb's overwhelming strength and arena instinct. What he had was solid technique, good resilience, and a string of spells learned from books. Their eyes met, they nodded tacitly. Light shimmered on the stone tablet at the center of the arena and at last settled on a location, Time Turner Workshop. Space twisted. The arena was replaced by a strange, dim mechanical workshop. A giant hourglass hung directly overhead. Around it, countless clocks of every size, on walls, ceilings, even floating in midair. Gears and mainsprings turned wildly, pendulums swung, and click-tick-hum blended into a chaotic symphony. The noise assailed their nerves, and the fluctuating flow of time subtly disrupted their rhythms. Crumb chose to strike first again, but he was noticeably more cautious. He didn't launch a brute force spell. He waved his wand and spoke, "Sonorous charm." He targeted a giant spiked gear pendulum clock hanging above Cedric. A deafening roar erupted, and the sound wave hit Cedric like a hammer. The pendulum accelerated, the gears meshed frantically, and sharp metal fragments flew toward him. Crumb had used the environment to create the first wave of chaos. Cedric was ready. The moment Crumb moved, he cast Muffliato on himself, then flicked his wand. "Protego!" A silver shield sprang up in front of him. The strange time flow slowed the fragments by a beat. Surprised, Cedric dropped the shield and stepped back calmly as the deadly metal pieces whooshed past. Crumb pressed the attack. His wand shot out like lightning. "Stupefy!" The red bolt screamed toward Cedric, but under the hourglass influence, the spell light itself began to slow. Time had become the biggest variable, yet neither combatant relented. As fellow seekers, their instincts were similar in many ways. Both found themselves drifting unconsciously closer. Petrificus totalis, impedimenta, incarceris. Spells bloomed from both wands, but with time dragging, the bolts crawled and were easily avoided. Crumb's burly form weaved through the clock forest, his wand finding a frantic grandfather clock to Cedric's right. "Confringo!" The grandfather clock exploded. Gears and broken mainsprings rained down in a deadly steel storm, fanning out and nearly cutting off every escape route. Cedric struck back at a hanging clock above Crumb. "Descendo!" The wall clock came loose and crashed toward Crumb. Yet both the whistling fragments and the falling clock slowed, then froze midair. Neither moved. Both ignored the suspended threats and kept trading spells. Then, without warning, the hourglass flipped with a thunderous roar. Time snapped forward. The suspended fragments and clock were hurled with deadly speed. Attacks that had hung in the air turned into instant, unavoidable torrents. In the blink before impact, both raised their wands at each other. "Deflecting charm! Deflecting charm!" The two spells met and collided in midair. The shock threw each of them backward. Cedric's backward arc let the fragment storm whistle past his chest. Crumb's fall kept him just clear of the heavy clock crashing down. The stands erupted. Both men hit the ground hard, breathless. Crumb, stronger and quicker to his feet, pushed up first and in haste sent a banishing charm at a floating pendulum clock, flinging it towards Cedric. Cedric had barely managed to get up when the head-sized pendulum screamed at him. Defindo! The clock shattered. Before the fragments could fall, Cedric flipped his wand upward and unleashed a multi-shot spell. The pieces reformed into a metallic torrent, slicing through the air at tremendous speed. Crumb roared and conjured a shield charm, taking the brunt of the storm. Cedric seized the moment and drove a barrage of spells at him. Stupefy, Expelliarmus, Confringo. Under the hourglass's reset surge, those spell lights were almost blur-like. Crumb couldn't dodge. He kept his shield up and absorbed them. Cedric's eyes darted to either side. Pincer attack! The clock suspended beside Crumb accelerated as if yanked by an invisible hand and slammed together, grazing his body in scattering fragments. Before Crumb could turn those shards into a counter, Cedric struck again. Bombarda Maxima! A yellow blast hit the falling fragments, and an enormous explosion threw Crumb back. He crashed to the floor. The audience cried out for Cedric, but the match was not finished. The hourglass flipped once more. Time slowed. Cedric's pursuing spells visibly crawled. Seeing Crumb hurt on the ground, Cedric made a move no one expected. Apparition! He vanished from sight and reappeared at Crumb's fallen side, pointing his wand. Red light danced along the tip. Bombarda Maxima! A shout cut through the air. It was Crumb's voice. Cedric's face drained. The attack detonated between them. The blast was closer and more violent than before. The shockwave hurled them both backward. Crumb, already on the ground, didn't go far. He forced himself up, aimed at the giant hourglass overhead, and with grim will cast an exploding charm. The glass casing shattered. Heavy sand poured down, and the chaotic time field dissipated from the workshop. Then, gathering himself, Crumb aimed his wand at Cedric and fired a precise stupefy. The bolt struck true. Cedric's grip slipped, his wand clattered onto the oil-stained floor. He swayed and collapsed, as if his bones had been hollowed out. A soft white light bloomed in time to catch him. The stone tablet rose from the ground, protective magic supporting his falling body, and the surroundings resumed their normal state. Crumb walked to Cedric, bent down slowly, and picked up the fallen wand in silence. When Cedric came to under the shield's influence, his eyes still hazy, Crumb had already returned the wand to him. "You are tenacious," Crumb said in his deep, hoarse voice, longer words than he'd offered all day. Cedric took the wand, feeling its cool weight, and managed a tired smile. "You are very strong. Congratulations, Crumb." His voice was weak but sincere. Crumb simply nodded. Then he turned to face the roaring Durmstrang stands, raised his wand, and the chanting rose like thunder. "Victor! Victor! Victor!" Sunlight broke through the clouds and fell across his resolute face, as if crowning the victor. Chapter 145, Farewell Dinner. After a short break, Cedric Diggory and Fleur Delacour returned to the arena to duel for the runner-up spot. They exchanged spell for spell until, in a dramatic finish, they both cast Expelliarmus at the same time. Two dazzling red jets of light struck them, and both wands were flung from their hands. Professor McGonagall immediately called it a draw. Cedric and Fleur would share the runner-up honor in the Tri-Wizard dueling competition. The Great Hall had never been more boisterous and warm. The long house tables had been moved aside and replaced by a lavish buffet and round tables for conversation. The air was thick with the smell of roast, the sweetness of pumpkin juice, and the excited, reluctant chatter of hundreds of students. Fleur Delacour stood surrounded by a cluster of Hogwarts and Beauxbatons girls, her silver bell laugh tinkling as she demonstrated how to conjure a shimmering rose of ice from the tip of her wand. "It's so beautiful," gushed Astoria, a first year, and Fleur smiled as she delicately handed the ice rose to her. "Oh, ladies, we can do this trick too," George Weasley announced, striding over with a grin. With a flick of his wand, he conjured a sunflower with golden petals that bobbed its head and absurdly began to sing in a comically off-key voice. "Hey, George, why are you stealing all the attention?" Fred called, sliding up beside his brother and throwing an arm around his shoulder. "Singing's boring. Watch this. Fred tapped the sunflower with his wand. Immediately it seemed to spring to life. Its song continued, but the stem waggled, the petals flailed, and the flower began a wildly clumsy little dance that set the surrounding girls laughing. "Oh, by the way," George said, remembering something, and turned to an older Beauxbaton student. "Where's Professor Nixia gone? We wanted to give her this passionate sunflower as a farewell present." Fred nodded earnestly beside him. The girl smiled and looked around. "I'm not sure. She was here a moment ago. When dinner started, she might have gone to speak with the headmistresses." "All right," the twins said in unison, tucking the still bobbing, singing sunflower into George's pocket with mock regret. At a nearby round table, Hermione Granger was quietly telling Harry and Ron, "Have you heard? The competition's been officially renamed the Inter-School Dueling Championship, and it's going to be an annual event." "Really? Who told you?" Ron mumbled around a chicken leg, eyes wide. "Rumor, but a good one," Hermione said, lifting her glass of pumpkin juice. "They say it was decided in a meeting of the 3 headmasters." Harry frowned and scanned the Great Hall. "That's odd. Since the final started this afternoon, I haven't seen Professor Dumbledore. And Professor Greengrass isn't here either. I hope he's not in trouble." "Why would he be?" Ron swallowed and looked puzzled. "Hermione," Ron said, lowering his voice with a hint of worry. "We all saw it. Umbridge, her finger was cut off by Professor Greengrass." "She deserved it," Ron snapped, stabbing at a piece of sausage. "I've never liked that woman. She tried to ruin the competition from the start." "But," Harry's voice was worried, "she's with the Ministry. What was her title again?" "Senior Undersecretary to the Minister for Magic in charge of law enforcement, Fudge's favorite," Hermione said. "Greengrass did that to her in front of everyone. The Ministry won't let that slide. He could be in real trouble." "They should mind their manners if they know what's good for them," Ron said dismissively, brimming with blind confidence. "Professor Greengrass isn't a pushover. You saw him. He's the most powerful teacher at Hogwarts." "I'm not denying he's strong, Ron," Hermione said patiently. "But he's up against the entire Ministry bureaucracy. That isn't like quarreling with other teachers. The Ministry remembers things like this." "Don't worry," Ron replied, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "Didn't people complain before about Greengrass being too harsh, and it went nowhere? He has his ways. Besides, he's friends with Professor Nixia, right? He probably has other influential connections." "Exactly," Harry added. "They could be dealing with it even now. Look." He pointed at the staff table. Every chair along it stood empty. "Oh ho ho, what do I hear? The professors haven't shown up." A high, squeaky voice piped up, and Peeves the poltergeist's head popped out from under the table, wearing a small bell hat and grinning mischief. The 3 looked stunned. "You, what are you doing here?" Ron managed, swallowing hard. His voice tightened. "Peeves, you shouldn't be here. This is a dinner. It's not for you to instruct Lord Peeves where to go." Peeves shot up in front of him, nose almost touching Ron's. "Lord Peeves does as he pleases. Lord Peeves goes where he pleases, especially when the professors aren't here." Wah! Before they could react, Peeves reached into his laughably fat trousers and pulled out a mountain of prank paraphernalia. Tickling powder, dung bombs, self-inking quills, super sticky gum bombs, fake biting cockroaches, and a riot of colorful fireworks. They tumbled onto the table with a chaotic splash, dousing Hermione's pumpkin juice cup and burying Ron's half-eaten chicken leg. "Tonight is Lord Peeves's night of revelry," he crowed, somersaulting in the air and grabbing a huge green-smoking stink bomb. "No one can control me. Let's start with, oh, look who it is. The annoying Gryffindor brats. Taste Lord Peeves's Midnight Fright gift pack. Take this." He hefted the ominous green bomb high, ready to smash it down on the 3 of them and the food-strewn table. "No," Hermione screamed. "Run!" Harry shouted, grabbing Hermione's arm. Ron could only watch in despair as his beloved chicken leg disappeared beneath the avalanche of prank items. Peeves picked up a stink bomb that spewed green smoke like the blare of a chaos horn. "Take that, you little brats!" he shrieked, heaving it with all his might toward the table where the golden trio sat. "Impedimenta!" Hermione reacted fastest, pointing her wand. An invisible barrier flashed into being just in time, barely deflecting the projectile. A dripping, unknown green goo sloshed off course. Boom! The stink bomb missed its intended target, and smashed into a table laden with Beauxbaton's delicate desserts. A thick cloud of green smoke burst out, smelling like rotten onions and old socks, and sticky slime splattered the faces of several Beauxbaton's girls enjoying macarons nearby. "Mon Dieu!" they screamed. Their careful makeup and silks were stained a bizarre green, and the smell almost made them faint. That was only the beginning. Peeves, delighted with his masterpiece, began doing airborne somersaults, his bell hat jingling. "Fantastic! Fantastic! More! Lord Peeves likes it!" he cackled, grabbing prank items from the nearest table and flinging them everywhere. Pop, pop, pop! Small pink bubblegum bombs were lobbed toward the Durmstrang table. On contact, they expanded violently into giant gooey wads, gluing several burly Durmstrang students, who were trying cleaning charms, fast to the floor, forcing them to curse in thick accents as they struggled. Splat! Self-propelling ink pens were launched like darts, lodging in collars and the carefully coiled hair buns of Beauxbaton's girls before spraying thick black ink in every direction. It looked as if the great hall were suddenly raining ink. Buzz, 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 a swarm of mechanical cockroaches with tiny noisy wings descended, diving for exposed wrists and ankles. They weren't dangerous, but their fuzzy touch and the surprise sent a chorus of high-pitched shrieks around the hall. Crackle, pop! Peeves lit fireworks that careened low through the room like wayward rockets, trailing colors, nicking chandelier decorations, whizzing past heads and burrowing into the wide sleeves of Beauxbaton's gowns before popping into harmless but startling puffs of smoke. The great hall devolved into unprecedented chaos. Elegance and composure evaporated. People scattered trying to avoid falling prank items, or frantically peeled bubblegum and ink from themselves while gagging at the pervasive green stench. Food was trampled, drinks spilled, decorations blackened or knocked over. Screams, gleeful laughter from those who enjoyed the anarchy, roars, and Peeves's frantic cackling mixed into a deafening din. "Catch him! Cleaning charm, useless! My new robes, who stepped on my foot? George, Fred, think of something!" Lee Jordan shouted to the twins as he dodged an ink-squirting quill. George and Fred exchanged a look, and their eyes lit with an enthusiasm that outshone even Peeves. "Merlin's lace stockings," Fred grabbed George's shoulder. "This is brilliant. Unprecedented." George's grin spread. He looked over at the panicked, disheveled students, angry and aimless, and a bright idea struck. "Peeves, you genius." "Not the time to praise him, brother," Fred said, and then, grinning madly, vaulted onto a table. He pointed his wand at his throat and cast a sonorous charm. "Students, are you going to stand there and let Peeves bully you? Tired of having no way to fight back? The Weasley twins present, counterattack time. Free ammunition, limited time offer." George hurriedly produced crystal vials and with a flourish poured out a pile of odd items. Fred threw boxes of brightly colored trinkets into the crowd. "Catch! Fight back!" Students grabbed the flying boxes and opened them. Inside were portable bubblegum sticky bombs, small, with strong adhesion, stick Peeves or his projectiles temporarily. Rainbow ink counterattack balls burst into harmless, brightly colored ink that washes out easily. Farting gnome grenades, pull the pin, toss. A swarm of rubber gnomes buzz out, making comical fart noises and disrupting vision. Harmless stink smoke bombs, pungent but non-toxic clouds, more colorful than Peeves's own bombs. "Counterattack," someone yelled, and the hall erupted. Hogwarts students had fought Peeves before. They knew how to turn a prank into a fight. Durmstrang treated it like a brutal team sport, hurling bubblegum bombs into Peeves's flight path. The Beauxbaton's girls, furious at their ruined gowns, froze flying ink pens with charms and flung rainbow ink balls with devastating accuracy. "Taste this, Ron," someone shouted, and Ron laughed as he pitched a farting gnome grenade at Peeves's feet. The rubber gnomes exploded out and buzzed around Peeves, their endless fart noises blurring his vision. "Whoa, little bugs! Annoying!" Peeves shrieked, swatting, though his face showed a gleeful thrill. The one-sided torment had become a pitched battle. "Good shot! Again!" Peeves taunted, rolling in the air to dodge a streak of rainbow ink balls. With a mischievous flick, he snatched a harmless stink smoke bomb from the twins and chucked it back. Pink smoke burst among a cluster of Beauxbaton's girls, leaving them looking as if they'd fallen into a jar of strawberry jam. "Use this against him," a Durmstrang student roared, sticking a portable bubblegum bomb to the tail of a firework. The firework, dragging the sticky wad, careened toward Peeves. Peeves dodged and, adapting, slapped a bubblegum bomb onto the back of an ink pen and hurled it like a missile toward a group of Gryffindor boys. The Great Hall was a war zone of popping color. Smoke bombs blossomed, rainbow ink flung bright streaks through the air, sticky bubblegum missiles flew everywhere, and farting gnomes buzzed through the wreckage. Tables and chairs became cover. Teams formed spontaneously, people covering one another as they showered Peeves with Weasley-made ammunition. Bosbaton's poise lay in tatters, Durmstrang's sternness was in ruins, and Hogwarts students, battle-tested in dodging Peeves's tricks, wove nimbly through the chaos. As the battle peaked, props and charms crisscrossed wildly. Squeak. The Great Hall doors banged open. A farting gnome grenade, just thrown by Malfoy and wrapped in thick bubblegum after an errant ricochet, had been launched with too much force. It flew off its intended course and hurtled straight for the doorway, where the 4 deans and 2 visiting principals had just stepped in. Every head turned, excitement froze into horror. Even Peeves fell silent for a beat, his eyes beneath his bell hat wide. The sticky, buzzing grenade drew a desperate parabola through the air and landed, steadily, impossibly, in Snape's outstretched hand. Chapter 147 Party. The 4 deans, Madame Maxime and Karkaroff, all looked mildly bewildered, none more so than Professor Snape. He frowned at the sizzling rubber gnome stuck to his palm, then flicked it aside. It didn't fly free. Bang! The gnome bomb detonated, and in a puff of multicolored smoke, a ridiculous winged gnome burst out, buzzing around the adults clustered at the entrance. Farting sounds erupted continuously, but no one laughed. The Great Hall fell into a stunned silence, as if the air itself had frozen. Snape's face drained of color. McGonagall pressed her lips together. Flitwick buried his face in his hands. Sprout sighed. Madame Maxime and Karkaroff scowled at the students from their schools. Peeves gave a strangled shriek, turned into a wisp of gray smoke with a whoosh, and darted into the nearest candlestick, vanishing without a trace. Snape drew his wand and pointed at the gnome still circling the heads of the faculty. It disintegrated into a harmless pinch of colored dust and died away. Then his cold, cutting gaze swept across the disordered hall and came to rest on the 2 red-haired arms dealers still standing atop a table. "Gryffindor, 20 points," he said without emotion. "Professor McGonagall, do you object?" McGonagall only pursed her lips. She was irritated too, but the younger Gryffindors protested. "Professor Snape, it was Malfoy who threw it. He's a Slytherin. What does that have to do with us?" "Talking back to a professor, 5 more points," Snape said, still expressionless. With a flick of his wand, the Great Hall began to right itself. The mess smoothed away. Other professors moved to restore order, while the students stood like quail, awaiting the consequences. What had started as Peeves's prank, amplified by the twins and nearly mortifying several senior staff with a flatulent gnome baptism, ended as abruptly as it had begun. Sagres knew nothing of the chaos at Hogwarts. He was in a safe house in the Forbidden Forest, holding a meeting with the Bronze Feather. Candlelight threw dancing shadows over the smooth wooden table, and pine and damp earth scented the air. Stork pushed a freshly delivered copy of the Daily Prophet toward Thunderbird. Thunderbird read it by the flame. 3 schools contest concludes. Durmstrang crowned victor, the headline proclaimed. The subheading read, Crumb outshines all. Diggory and Delacour draw. Unprecedented dueling spectacle ends. Magical dueling arena shakes the wizarding world. Beneath the headline were 3 lively photographs. Crumb in profile raising his wand to accept cheers. The instant Cedric and Fleur smiled at one another after both were disarmed on the ice, and a sweeping shot of the magnificent, ever-changing dueling arena. A bold passage stood out. This magical marvel, the magical dueling arena, created by Hogwarts, is the undisputed star of the event. It not only perfectly simulates extreme environments, but contains such mysterious enchantments that veteran wizards are awed. Internal sources say the arena's design blueprint will become the model for future magical dueling venues. "What a spectacle," Thunderbird said, folding the paper. A hint of admiration shone in his eyes. "Perhaps I should suggest to Principal Fontaine that Ilvermorny sends students next time. This is something else." "Of course," Sagres replied calmly, tapping his fingertips on the table. provided your school can handle the distance across the ocean. He glanced at Hummingbird, who sat quietly at his side. How are your soul-weaving studies progressing? Hummingbird looked up, focused and serious. I've mastered the techniques and am preparing practical treatment plans for soul trauma. Very good. Sagres nodded, approval plain on his face. That means your Order of Merlin, first class, is within reach. Hummingbird hesitated, then admitted, honestly, I don't really crave the medal for its own sake. She thought for a moment. Like you improved so many healing spells back then and didn't even show up for the ceremony. That was different. Sagres was calm. I didn't need it then, and I didn't want to be pulled into the ministry's political whirlpool. Hummingbird nodded in understanding. Sagres changed the subject. How is Lockhart? Hummingbird's expression grew solemn. St. Mungo's convened several top healers. The consensus is that the life force he absorbed may not be fully restorable. Robin couldn't help but interject, his tone complex. Lockhart had once been an idol he'd adored. So his current condition. Hummingbird continued plainly. He looks older, deep wrinkles, almost no hair, but his external injuries and magical imbalance have stabilized. Strangely, he isn't rushing to be discharged. His primary healers say Mr. Lockhart intends to finish 2 new books while still in intensive care, returning to Hogwarts as a professor and dueling the basilisk. Dueling the basilisk? Sagres echoed incredulously. Yes, Hummingbird said. The dueling events at Hogwarts have reignited his creative passion. His room is practically buried in clippings. Sagres allowed himself a thin smile that vanished just as quickly. Let him be for now. It's not time to send him to Azkaban. He fixed Hummingbird with a steady look. By the way, how are your memory magic studies going? Memory restoration spells are solid, Hummingbird answered, but other areas of memory magic are only average. Sagres nodded slowly. Then focus on memory recall for now. Veritasrum can force answers, but the most reliable method is to precisely locate the names of the true victims, whose lives he stole, buried in the chaos of his memories. That way we avoid mistakes. Hummingbird accepted the task with solemn nods. Sagres broke the momentary silence. Anyone else want to learn something while we're at it? Me? Kestrel shot up her hand like an eager schoolchild. Teach me the weather charm you used today, the one that controls clouds and rain. Nightingale cocked her head with a teasing smile. What for? Want to be a mobile meteorological station? Kestrel blushed and grasped for a practical excuse. I sleep outside a lot. Rain or snow makes everything cold and soaked, such a nuisance. If I could wave my hand and chase the clouds or stop the rain, life would be so much easier. I gave you a magical tent, Sagres said, puzzled. It regulates temperature and humidity. Even if it hails, you won't get wet. Please, I'm a wizard, Kestrel waved her arms dramatically. A tent can't compare to real magic. A flick of the wrist to summon wind or part the clouds. That's wizardry. Sagres looked at her eager face, shook his head in mock exasperation, but did not refuse. Chapter 148, The Past of Miss Snow Owl. The remaining 7 quickly settled on the magic they wanted to learn. Everything from ancient magic to rune magic, from specific counter curses to advanced disillusionment charms, and finally, fiendfire control. Sagres completed the instructions swiftly using memory siphon and mechanical mind. Swift, who had been listening quietly, finally spoke. Gringotts has discovered a new magical ruin on the seabed near Dilia Island. Worth noting, there are wizard eyewitness reports claiming to have seen a quintuped on the island. A quintuped, voices rose at once. Is that reliable? Others demanded. Quintupids were extraordinarily rare. None present had ever seen one. Accounts of wizards encountering quintupids and surviving were few and far between, so research data was almost non-existent, mostly confined to ancient legend and the Ministry of Magic's confidential archives. Highly credible, Swift nodded, and 3 muggles died because of it. Muggles, Sagres' brows knit. Isn't Delia Island protected by a powerful muggle-repelling charm from the Ministry? How did they get there? The exact reason isn't clear yet, Swift said. But some curse breakers at Gringotts I know mentioned that a parchment map was found on the 3 muggles' fishing boat, along with a lot of professional fishing gear. It looks like they followed the map to fish. A map? Sagres fell silent for a moment, but Delia Island is supposed to be unplottable. It shouldn't appear on any map. The others frowned at that. Only Kestrel and Robin had never heard of a quintuped. They exchanged blank looks. Quintuped? What is that? A five-legged troll? Kestrel asked. Swift explained calmly. The quintuped originates from a blood feud between two wizarding families in Scotland, the Macboons and the Macleavies. The patriarch of the Macleavy family used violent magic to transform the entire Macboon family into five-legged monsters. The transformed Macboons slaughtered the Macleavies, but their intellect regressed and they couldn't revert to human form. Their descendants remained quintupeds ever since. Is it dangerous? Robin asked, swallowing. Extremely, Swift said flatly. The Ministry's Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures classifies it as a 5X grade magical creature and keeps it under close watch. They're rare, but every sighting has been accompanied by bloodshed. Does the Ministry know about this? Thunderbird asked. Apparently no official report has been filed yet, Swift mused. Even if they do find out, the Ministry is unlikely to intervene proactively. As long as no one else trespasses on Delia Island, they'll probably leave it alone. Unless it comes out on its own, he added. Could other fishermen, like those three muggles, have found the island? Unlikely, Swift replied. Those three found it because of that parchment map of unknown origin. Without the map, the muggle-repelling charm and the island's concealment should keep others away. Sagres had been quiet until now. He looked up slowly. Swift, about that magical ruin, does Gringotts have any specific information? Its age, its nature. Gringotts hasn't done any substantial exploration yet, Swift shook his head. Delia Island is very sensitive. With the newly discovered ruin and the quintuped rumors, the Ministry's surveillance of the area is extremely strict. Why? Are you interested? He had caught the point of Sagres' question. Sagres tapped his fingertips on the wooden table. I remember Gringotts caused muggle deaths before during a development accident, and it was swept aside without proper investigation or accountability. That bothers me. I want to do something. So, should we? Snowy Owl's eyes lit up. She looked eager. No, Sagres cut her off decisively, reining in his impulse. Let's let it play out for now. The ruin and the quintuped are there. The Ministry and Gringotts will act sooner or later. We'll wait. Snowy Owl glanced at Kestrel, Nightingale, and Robin. Are you three at Hogwarts right now? She asked casually. Kestrel and Nightingale both nodded. I'll be heading back to Beauxbatons tomorrow, Nightingale added. Oh. Snowy Owl's fingers toyed with the rim of her teacup. She hesitated, as if reluctant to speak. Is something wrong? Sagres noticed and pressed gently. No, Snowy Owl waved her hand quickly, trying to cover up. It's just... I heard from the Merchant Guild that Professor Kettleburn from Hogwarts will be joining our Magical Creatures Merchant Guild as a special consultant when he retires next year. So? Sagres' expression stayed neutral. Well, Snowy Owl chose her words carefully, her eyes darting. Professor Kettleburn has always been the Care of Magical Creatures professor at Hogwarts, right? If he stops teaching and a new professor takes over, the textbooks might change. I'm wondering if the guild could secure the supply contract for the new textbooks. Her voice trailed off into the calculating, guilty tone of a merchant. Sagres watched her evasive manner for a moment, then asked a question that made everyone sit up straighter. So, Snowy Owl, why exactly were you put on the British Ministry of Magic's prohibited entry blacklist back then? The question fell like a spell. The safe house fell silent. Even Dobby, scrubbing the wall in the corner, perked up his ears. All eyes turned towards Snowy Owl. Her cheeks flushed. She let out 2 nervous laughs and averted her gaze. It's nothing big. Cough. A few years ago, the Ministry's Department of Education was going to procure a batch of the Invisible Book of Invisibility as textbooks for Hogwarts. And those books, as you know, they're invisible. So. Sagres' face registered recognition and amusement. Kestrel's eyes widened in disbelief. You didn't, she blurted. You took that order and then gave them nothing? Snowy Owl protested loudly. I'm a legitimate businesswoman. Of course I gave them something. It's just... Her voice dropped almost to a whisper. A little less than the quantity agreed. Specifically? Nightingale asked. Sagres answered with quiet inevitability. Over 1,000 books were missing. The Ministry didn't even notice right away. And that batch was urgently needed by Hogwarts students that year. He remembered the chaos, Because of your little bit of a shortage, that book's price on the second-hand market shot up to over 100 galleons a copy. For a whole term, half the school was frantic trying to find a copy they could actually read. Snowy Owl gave an extremely dry, embarrassed laugh, wishing she could disappear. Yes, I was punished later. I was fined a large sum. A very large sum. She added in a small voice, as if drawing a line under that rather inglorious chapter of her past. Chapter 149, Creatures in the Forbidden Forest. I was too young and too foolish back then, Snowy Owl said, regret thick in her voice. When aurors from the British Ministry of Magic started investigating, I was afraid of being exposed, so I panicked and tried to bribe an official with the Book of Invisibility spells. That book was a rare commodity at the time, literally invisible, so it was perfect for a gift. And what happened then? Even Thunderbird, the steady elder, pressed. Snowy Owl lowered her gaze, shoulders slumped. I ran into a one-eyed auror. His magical eye was incredibly powerful. It could see through any invisibility. And, Robin asked, curiosity piqued. Caught red-handed with undeniable evidence, attempted bribery, disrupting the ministry's order, and the previous supply fraud. She hesitated to say the words aloud. Multiple offenses piled up. The huge fine was the least of it. The Ministry of Magic decided I wasn't just a crooked merchant. They called me dangerous, someone who would mock their intelligence with invisible stolen goods. They put me on the permanent entry blacklist. Sagres didn't answer at once. He simply watched Snowy Owl with those deep, assessing eyes, making her feel like she was sitting on pins and needles. She almost couldn't breathe until he finally spoke. A very large fine and a permanent ban from commercial activities in Britain. That's what you call a punishment, he said, then added after a pause. Snowy Owl, about supplying Hogwarts with new textbooks, I suggest you. Suggest what? Snowy Owl blurted. Suggest I change my identity? Sagres gave a soft sigh, a faint trace of pity in it. I believe you've reformed, but in the Department of Education's archives, your name still sits at the top of the blacklist, stamped untrustworthy. Stork interjected, unable to hide a touch of scorn. Does any of that matter now? He asked. Does it matter? Snowy Owl lifted her head for a moment, then sank back with a blend of disappointment and stubborn hope. It matters. If I could get my foot back in the door at Hogwarts, even with a small supply contract, it would tear open that damned prohibition. It wouldn't just be a single order. It would be my ticket to clearing my name. Sagres studied her a long moment. Snowy Owl, who had built a trading empire across the globe, was clearly wounded by this more than by lost profits. It was a humiliation she longed to wash away. Seeing the genuine regret on her face made him soften. He gave a subtle, almost invisible nod. I can try to mediate for you, he said calmly. See if we can work around the Department of Education's usual procedures. The hope in Snowy Owl's eyes flared into exhilaration. She nearly leapt from her chair. You mean you'd actually? No guarantee, madam. Sagres raised a hand to temper her excitement. It's only an attempt. The Department of Education isn't a monolith. There are always cracks. Hogwarts itself, especially the current headmaster and some senior professors, still have significant sway in textbook selection. Robin added, the ministry's bureaucracy is vast and sluggish. Sometimes people downstream make decisions first and file reports later. When the meeting broke up, night had already fallen. Sagres, Nightingale, and Kestrel walked back to Hogwarts together. The damp wind smelled of earth and growing things, tugging at the hems of their robes. Something rustled in the brush, like a hidden beast slipping through the undergrowth. As they moved through the Forbidden Forest, talk turned naturally to the dangerous, exotic creatures that lived there. Nightingale, the potion master with an unending appetite for rare ingredients, couldn't help breaking the silence. Can you reliably harvest high-quality acromantula venom from the Forbidden Forest? She asked. You need acromantula venom? Sagres glanced at her sideways. Yes, Nightingale replied with a helpless tone. What's on the market is either full of impurities or too weak to be useful for precise potions. If you need it, you can get some fresh now, Sagres said, as casually as if he'd suggested picking mushrooms. There are nests all through this forest. Find a suitable one. Kestrel's voice rose in a mix of excitement and dread. Now? Really? Bold as she was, she still had a psychological barrier about those huge hairy spiders. Then she brightened with another bit of gossip. I also heard there's a centaur tribe in the Forbidden Forest. Is that true? Yes. Sagres's voice was neutral, but Kestrel sensed it cool a degree. A proud, narrow-sighted people. Kestrel blinked at the slightly dismissive remark. But my grandfather said their astrology is superb. They can predict the future. Perhaps, Sagres said, not committing. But sometimes the ability to predict the future makes a people short-sighted. Obsessed with the stars, they miss the thorns at their feet. Nightingale nodded. Relying on prophecy can blind you to immediate danger and invite disaster. They fell quiet, their footsteps muffled in the leaf litter. Moonlight filtered through the branches. Ahead, in a small clearing, 3 tall figures stepped out without sound. They were centaurs, broad-chested men joined to powerful horse bodies, muscles shining in the night, manes and tails lifted in the breeze. Leading them was an especially burly stallion centaur, spear in hand, his dark eyes fixed on the 3 walkers, especially Sagres, the man who'd just spoken. Kestrel drew in a quick breath. Nightingale's fingers went to her wand. The centaurs stood like carved statues, heavy displeasure clear in their posture. The leader took a slow step forward, hooves sinking into the damp earth. "Human wizards," he said, his voice carrying like a thrown spear. "The night wind brings disrespectful whispers. Have you come to profane the wisdom of the centaurs?" Sagres stopped and met the creature's gaze, his face unreadable. "I stated a fact, not an insult," he replied evenly. Chapter 150. A time traveler must have a flexible outlook on life. The young centaur behind the dark brown warrior snorted in annoyance, his hooves pawing the earth, his eyes sharpened with affronted anger. "Arrogant," the lead centaur raised his spear. "The mysteries of the stars are not for short-sighted wizards like you to fathom." Carrion was right. An older centaur with a grizzled mane stepped forward and struck the ground heavily with his spear. "You humans live briefly and think even less. How dare you judge our centaur covenant with the stars with your shallow understanding?" He took another step, his muscular chest heaving in the moonlight, radiating oppressive force. "The starry sky is the loom of destiny, the compass of all things. We interpret it, listen to it, and follow the path it guides. As for your so-called thorns underfoot," he scoffed as if hearing the finest joke, "that is merely the dust you raise with your ignorance and recklessness. The stars have long since revealed the course of fate, but you foolish creatures cannot see the revelation above you, nor the traps beneath your feet. You will only march, step by step, toward destruction." His voice rose until it shook the leaves. The other 2 centaurs snorted and stamped, angry white puffs puffing from their nostrils. "And your talk of relying on prophecy." The dark brown centaur swept a cold gaze over Nightingale, disdain flashing in his eyes. "That is not reliance, but submission. The guidance of the stars is like a river's current. The wise go with it, only the foolish struggle against it." He turned that glare toward Sagres. "Now answer me, wizard. Who gave you the audacity to trespass into the Forbidden Forest, which the centaurs have guarded for generations, and to profane our faith and wisdom with your feet soiled by the world?" Sagres met the aggressive barrage without a flicker of fear. He raised a single brow. "Speech over?" He held their angry, arrogant stares with a calm eye and an undisguised sneer on his lips. A people who pride themselves on nobility, yet track and eavesdrop. He let the words hang, slow and deliberate, his gaze sweeping the self-important centaurs. "I merely cast out bait, and you bit." He snapped his fingers. Instantly, the spears in the centaurs' hands twisted and warped into tough ropes, binding them fast. Shock and fury fought on their faces. "You ask who gave me the confidence?" Sagres looked down at the bound centaurs, voice cold. "Did your companions not warn you? Did your stars not guide you?" Crack, the crisp sound of a joint dislocating rang out. "Ah, my leg!" "Since you revere the guidance of the stars," Sagres stepped toward the centaur, who writhed in pain, his tone measured. "Then lead the way. Let's go meet your 2 wise chiefs." The lead centaur struggled to raise his head, humiliation burning in his eyes. What do you intend to do?" "Do what?" Sagres' smile was a chill thing. "According to the Wizard and Sentient Being Convention and the Forbidden Forest Management Regulations, your tracking, eavesdropping, and attempted assault are serious provocations and infringements." He paused, voice steady and cold. I demand to meet your leader to formally negotiate compensation for the reputational damage, personal threat, and mental distress you have caused me and my companions tonight. Compensation? The centaurs barely believed their ears. The humiliation threatened to tip into a roar, but the sharp pain in his limb reduced the lead centaur to hissing gasps. Yes, compensation. Sagres' tone allowed no argument. Valus, make a list. Nightingale immediately understood and suppressed a smile. Mental distress fee, reputation compensation, and lost work fee for wasting our precious time, totaling, she glanced at the centaurs, bound like parcels, 1,500 galleons. Kestrel, standing beside her, gaped. 1,500 galleons? And a lost work fee? Isn't that a bit much? Sagres cocked his head and looked at him. Too much? He said lightly, then scanned the centaur's furious, contorted face and added slowly, Are centaurs even people? Kestrel hesitated, then, with decisive approval, gave a thumbs up. You're right. Sagres had not meant to entangle himself with the centaurs, but these arrogant creatures had practically delivered themselves to him. It was like being handed a pillow when drowsy. He gave a look, and Nightingale used her wand to lift the ropes. Hey, steering the three bound centaurs like stubborn, inferior horses. Kestrel trailed close, both nervous and exhilarated, fingers never far from his wand. They stepped through a stand of gnarled ancient oaks, and the space ahead opened. Dozens of torches flared, revealing the centaur settlement. Animal hide and branch tents ringed an ancient stone altar etched with intricate astrological patterns. Farther up, a steep rock face honeycombed with natural caves glowed with faint lights, lending the camp a solemn, mysterious air. It's you again, a voice thundered. Sagres looked up to see an elder centaur with a snow-white mane, someone he vaguely remembered. Around him more than 20 centaur warriors stood in a fan, fully armed, their arrowheads flashed coldly in the torchlight. Regrettably, it's me again, Sagres said, nodding calmly. It seems the brilliant stars have once again forgotten to give you the revelation to avoid me. The white-maned elder bristled. Last time you harmed our tribesmen in the Forbidden Forest and stole our treasures, and now you kidnap. Watch your words. Sagres cut in smoothly. Last time, we rescued your trapped tribesmen and collected a reasonable reward. This time... He let his gaze sweep the three bound centaurs. His tone turned icier. We caught several offenders red-handed, stealthily tracking and eavesdropping, even attempting an attack. Nightingale waved her wand, and a parchment scroll, densely filled with text, floated before the elder. He snatched it, fingers rough and trembling. What is this? He barked, scanning the list. Compensation for offenses committed against us, Sagres said evenly. If you lack galleons, equivalent magical materials or items are acceptable. The elder's face darkened, his facial muscles trembled with rage. Enough, he roared, tail lashing. Centaurs will never accept insulting extortion. His roar rolled through the oak grove, and the torches flickered. Sagres did not so much as raise an eyebrow. He stood watching the angry elder with a calm, indifferent gaze, as if looking at a wooden post. Is that so? He asked quietly. Nightingale stood expressionless at his side, her silver-white hair stirring in the breeze. Kestrel's palms were damp. His wand tip glowed faintly. All the centaurs took an instinctive half-step back. A deeper, more authoritative voice rose from the depths of the tribe, carrying a controlled calm. Enough, Kakus. The crowd parted automatically, making way. A massive male centaur stepped forward. His coat was the rich chestnut of aged oak. Knotted muscles rolled beneath a thick, glossy mane. A circlet set with dark silver starstones rested on his forehead. His eyes were sharp and steady, but now they were heavy with fatigue and a weary resignation. He was the tribe's leader, Trom. Trom cast a stern glance at the three bound centaurs. The look alone made them drop their heads in shame. Then his gaze found Sagres, and his expression grew complicated. He knew all too well the frightening power and ruthless efficiency beneath the wizard's calm exterior. The unpleasant rescue and reward from the last encounter had left a deep scar on some members of the tribe. Stars, Trom thought bitterly. The stars might point a way, but they could not always be trusted to speak plainly. He also understood how dangerous pride could be. Some of his tribesmen fancied that their strength and their reading of omens made every life theirs to take beneath their spears. But if they had truly been that mighty, why had they been forced into the forest's depths for so long until only a single bloodline remained? He had no power to change what 300 years of near extermination by wizards had done to his people. Old arrogance was not something he could purge overnight. Trom's gaze settled on the parchment Nightingale held. "Sirs," he said, his voice deep and steady, stripped of Caucus's hot temper, "tonight's incident is our fault. My tribesmen were the aggressors." Elder Caucus opened his mouth sharply, as if to protest, but Trom's stern look silenced him. A dead hush fell over the gathered centaurs, broken only by the crackle of torches. "Even the stars have their clouded nights," Trom added, bitterness lacing his words as he looked for a dignified way to accept blame. "They were misread, and some acted without understanding. It was a grave mistake." He paused, making an evidently difficult decision. "As for the compensation you asked for, we accept." Meeting Sagres's inscrutable eyes, he spoke each word deliberately. "Please choose freely from the items in the tribal treasury. Whatever we have, if it pleases you, it is yours." He bowed his proud head slightly, offering no resistance, no vain argument, simply a clear, calm acknowledgement of defeat. Sagres's face was unreadable. He showed neither triumph nor pity. After a long moment, he spoke evenly. "A wise decision." He turned to Nightingale. "Valus, pick what you need," he added lightly. "As for the acromantula venom, we'll collect some fresh later." Nightingale nodded, put away her wand, and moved toward the depths of the encampment. Kestrel followed, curiosity in her stride. Sagres's gaze returned to Trom, his eyes seeming to pierce the centaur's strong frame and look straight into his soul. Trom straightened, bearing the scrutiny, though the wariness in him nearly spilled out. He forced it down, like a leader must. "Trom," Sagres said, his voice losing some of its usual distance, "you are intelligent. More than many of the proud centaurs who've been pushed into the forest, you know how to face reality and weigh risks." Trom's eyes flickered, neither denying nor conceding. Sagres's words fell like a cold scalpel, cutting to the heart of the tribe's plight. Isolation, dependence on hunting, and vague guidance from the stars, those are not long-term answers. He let his gaze sweep over the humble shelters and the wary, bewildered faces of the centaurs. The forest's resources are not endless, and the outside world's attention has never truly left these lands. "What are you saying?" Trom asked. "I'm saying you should consider a new path, a way to communicate with the outside world." Trom's brows drew together, instinctive resistance edged with a tiny, cautious curiosity. Communicate? With those greedy, cunning wizards? His doubt was plain. Sagres seemed to see it, but he remained unhurried. "Start small. Begin with the exchange of goods." He gestured in the direction Nightingale had gone. "This ancient forest holds many treasures rare beyond its borders. Herbs, minerals, materials from magical beasts. Items like those in your treasury. The outside world has what you lack. Better tools, salt and iron you cannot easily make, fabrics to withstand the cold, and knowledge." For a moment, Trom seemed to stop breathing. The picture Sagres painted overlapped with a vague, unacknowledged notion in him. The tribe was slipping, tools growing cruder, skills being forgotten, winters harsher. He had never dared voice it, let alone act. "A controlled small trading post," Sagres continued, almost coaxing. "Under your control, or someone you appoint. Don't worry, only an equal exchange. And understand this, I know your value better than most humans." His look lingered for a moment on the three bound centaurs, implying the consequences of arrogance. Trom felt his heart hammer. The proposal tasted like both poison and antidote. He searched Sagres's calm face for a trap and found only inscrutable serenity. To wither away in the forest or reach out for this thorny vine that might bear new life, he hesitated. Silence stretched, filled only by the torch's hiss. Finally, Trom looked up, wariness giving way to a complex light in his eyes. "Sir," he said, turning his gaze away from the wizard and toward the flames as if to draw strength, "opening contact with the outside, especially wizards, will cause upheaval in the tribe." He drew a deep breath, chest rising and falling as his strong muscles tensed and relaxed. "I see the risk. It could swallow us. But the other path you spoke of," he swallowed, forcing the words out, "the struggle for survival, the loss of skills, the agony of winter, those shadows have been upon us too long. The stars cannot light every corner, nor fill our people's bellies." Elder Kakus made a suppressed growl, but Trom raised a hand to halt him. His gaze moved over the faces around him, some shocked, some confused, some quietly angry, then settled back on Sagres. For the good of the tribe, I am willing to try this first step. As you said, small scale. Begin with an exchange of goods. He hesitated, then added, but at first the arrangement can only be between us. Only you and I will know. Sagres listened without changing expression. When Trom finished, he nodded once. I will choose a location that is safe for both sides. As for personnel, he let his eyes pass over the other centaurs, frowning at the display of various emotions. I do not tolerate arrogant fools. Do you understand what I mean? Don't worry, Trom said firmly. I will take part personally. They conferred quickly over some details. For the first time that night, Trom's tense shoulders eased a fraction. 152. Acromanthus. Just then Nightingale and Kestrel emerged from deep within the tribe. Nightingale carried several faintly glowing crystal vials, her face as cool and detached as ever. Kestrel followed, with an excited light in her eyes, newly opened to a strange wonder. They walked over to Sagres and nodded. Sagres' gaze lingered on the vials. He gave a slight, formal nod. These items will serve as compensation for the offense, he said flatly. A flicker of hurt crossed Trom's features before he schooled them into neutrality. Sagres' eyes shifted toward the forest's edge. Next, we need to collect some fresh acromantula venom. Leader Trom, could you point us in the right direction? Preferably the quickest path. Acromantula are very dangerous. Trom's gaze swept across the tribe's warriors, as if weighing whether to send someone to guide them. No need, Sagres interrupted evenly. You only need to point out the direction and describe the most obvious landmarks. We do not require a guide. Trom hesitated, then finally extended an arm and pointed into the dense woods. Follow this ancient path, covered in vines, heading east until you see 3 strangler figs entwined. At their base is a large hollow. Turn right there and descend into the stream valley. That's where most of the nests are. Sagres nodded. The 3 wizards turned and left. Be careful. Their eyes are everywhere, and their fangs are as fast as lightning, Trom called after them. Only silence and low, suppressed gasps remained in the clearing as the 3 figures disappeared into the trees. Trom stood rooted, staring after them for a long time. Elder Kakus approached, worry and anger written plain on his face. Trom, you're playing with fire, trading with wizards and letting them provoke those acromantula? If they die, then they were nothing special, Trom replied bluntly, and our problem will be solved. Kakus's voice dropped. If they succeed, then we may have to face an even worse truth. Not only might we need to trade with him, we may even require his protection. For survival, Kakus, there is always a price to be paid. The deeper they followed Trom's directions, the thicker and heavier the darkness became, pressing in like a living thing. Gnarled vines hung from ancient trunks like the coils of giant skeletal snakes. The path was carpeted in years of fallen leaves and slippery moss that squelched underfoot. Kestrel's voice cut the hush, edged with nerves. Are acromantula really as big as the books say? Sagres didn't look back. A normal adult is roughly the size of a car. Kestrel swallowed, picturing the terrifying illustrations from Fantastic Beasts. Relax, Iresha, Nightingale said from the other side, voice cool with the faintest teasing. Their size depends on age and food supply. In a place like this, she let the sentence hang. The nutrition should be quite abundant. Rather than reassuring her, the remark tightened Kestrel's throat. Sister Nightingale, have you collected acromantula venom before? A few times, Nightingale answered simply. Mostly I bought it. It isn't common. Acromantula venom is a Class A non-trade commodity, strictly regulated by the Ministry of Magic in many countries. International trade is prohibited, Sagres added casually. Are they very dangerous? Kestrel pressed, seeking comfort in experience. Nightingale fell silent for a moment as if recalling. Very dangerous. Their hissing is sharp. They move faster than you expect. They're carnivorous and will actively hunt large creatures, humans included. They're intelligent enough to understand complex commands and to hunt cooperatively. That powerful? Kestrel's eyes widened. They're rated XXXX, the highest danger level, Sagres said without turning his head. They pose an extreme threat to a wizard's life and cannot be domesticated or safely controlled. They skirted thick webs and pressed deeper. The air grew damp and cold, carrying a cloying, rotten, fishy reek. The ground began to slope downward. Trees twisted into grotesque shapes, their bark covered in grayish-white fungi, the source of the miasma Trom had warned about. Nightingale abruptly stopped and raised her wand. Strangler figs. 3 enormous ancient trunks were entangled in a bizarre embrace, their buttress roots exposed and forming a deep, dark hollow like a great gaping mouth. Torn, dust-coated cobwebs clung to the hollow's rim. Right and down, Sagres confirmed. He led the way into the hollow, the light from his wand cutting a small circle through the gloom and revealing a steep descent of roots and slick moss. At the bottom, the scene worsened. Gray-white miasma drifted ankle-high, making the air viscous and visibility poor. Layer upon layer of fine, net-like webs hung between dead trunks like curtains. The rotten, sweet stench was almost nauseating. A soft, squelching rustle came from all sides, as if something crawled through slime. Kestrel felt cold creep up her spine, whether fear or something brushing against her, she couldn't tell. Then, without warning, the 3 wand lights went out. Darkness swallowed them all. Kestrel's heart leapt into her throat. She groped for bearings, following the faint sounds of Sagres and Nightingale. Eyes! Nightingale whispered into her ear. They're everywhere. Straining into the thin slivers of natural light that pierced the high canopy, Kestrel finally saw them. Behind the web curtains, in root crevices, in branch shadows, countless eerie green points glimmered. Thousands of cold, hungry eyes watched silently. The dots blinked and shifted as the spiders moved, making the whole forest seem alive with a slow breathing pattern. Merlin's beard, Kestrel breathed, voice trembling. She felt trapped in a jar full of spiders. Quiet. Sagres' tone brooked no argument. A muting spell slipped over her lips. She opened her mouth, but no sound came. He glanced at her with an expression as cold as a wave. Kestrel went mute as a winter insect. She knew Sagres' seriousness. Poor performance would not be tolerated. Sagres turned to Nightingale. What do you need? Not newly molted ones, not juveniles. Nightingale's wand cast a faint glow in the black. Prefer healthy adults. The older, the better. Then we must go deeper, Sagres said. The outer areas are full of juveniles and freshly matured individuals. Chapter 153. Aragog Sagres pointed toward the thickest miasma and the most tangled webbing. There, dim through the gloom, was the entrance to a huge raised nest. An earthen mound bound with dead branches and heavy spider silk crouched like a tumor in the dark. A leathery hiss and the steady drip-drip of some liquid echoed through the air. Less than 10 paces to his left, behind a stand of giant fungi, several pairs of emerald eyes that had been moving slowly snapped to a stop and turned toward them in unison. Sagres raised his wand with a barely perceptible motion and sent a sharp, silent severing charm cutting through a broad curtain of webbing that blocked their path. The spell shredded the silk and decapitated several small spiders that had just peeked out. Foul-smelling fluids and severed limbs splattered. The Kestrel's heart almost leapt out of her chest. From the darkness to her front right, a car-sized shadow lunged. She reacted instinctively, casting an obstacle curse. The spell light struck the creature. The giant spider screamed. Its 8 long legs suddenly made clumsy and slow, and it crashed onto the slick ground. Don't chase what runs, Sagres said without looking back, casually pointing his wand over his shoulder. A red beam struck the head of another lunging spider, and it stopped dead. But if they dare to pounce, kill them. The spider's shriek cut off mid-scream. Its massive body collapsed and dissolved into a puddle of rank liquid. Their numbers are too great, and the forbidden forest lacks natural predators, Sagres said evenly. Here they are nothing more than an invasive species. The others did not know what an invasive species was, but the sheer swarm before them made the meaning painfully clear. The path into the nest became a blood-soaked trail studded with corpses. Nightingale moved like a precise assassin, alternating silent severing charms, blasting curses, and hard frost spells, dismembering the giant spiders that dared raise themselves or blasting them into the walls. She did not forget to gather the venom sacs from the fallen beasts. Threats from the flanks or rear, poisonous fangs or jets of venom were warded off by her invisible barrier. She surprised herself with the speed of her reactions. Her body seemed to decide before her mind. Sagres was shadow and death, Countless acromantulas fell silently before they closed the distance. To preserve the venom sacs, he avoided fire. The three of them moved without wasted motion, like a cold harvest. Webbing, shattered carapaces, splattered green blood, and fragments of organs soon carpeted the ground. The sickly sweet rot gave way to the heavy stench of blood and char, nauseating and sharp. The spiders' angry, fearful shrieks rose and fell into a macabre symphony. Working in perfect coordination, they carved through the swarm with relentless force toward the nest's heart. When they cut through the last curtain of silk, the space beyond made them all pause. The chamber was vast, like the hollowed belly of a mountain. The walls and dome were swathed in viscous silk several feet thick, like a white blanket. Worse, the floor was a mountain of bones, piles of white skeletons stacked like refuse. Human skulls, broken ribs, thick horse leg bones, and various unidentifiable skeletons lay heaped and wrapped in filthy silk. Some were still fresh, strips of rotted leather clinging to them, stinking of decay. The kestrel's stomach turned. She went pale and quickly averted her gaze. Nightingale swept her cold eyes across several skeletons that were clearly centaur warriors. At the center of the bone pile sat a white cocoon, several times larger than the other silk casings, shaped like a small hill and pulsing faintly with suffocating pressure. Around it lay the bodies of several old giant spiders, the guards Sagres and Nightingale had killed while trying to protect the cocoon. Sagres leveled his wand at the cocoon. A dangerous red glow gathered at its tip. "Wait, wizard, don't hurt." A hoarse, ancient voice trembled from deep within the silk. The sudden human speech made the kestrel jump. Nightingale snapped her wand to the sound, disbelief flashing across her face. An acromantula that could speak? It overturned everything they knew of magical zoology. Sagres did not lower his wand. The glow did not die. He stared coldly at the writhing cocoon. "Show your head, or I'll blast you and your den to pieces." The cocoon convulsed. Silk tore open painfully, forming an aperture. First emerged a pair of enormous chelicerae, gray-furred and scarred, then an old, bloated spider head the size of a battered truck pushed out. Its compound eyes were cloudy with a gray film, all 8 dulled. Its carapace wore the pits and scars of age and battle. This was the king of the nest, Aragog. The great body crawled free in slow, labored motions. Each step seemed an ordeal. The ancient carapace creaked as if overburdened, and the 8 legs trembled under the swollen weight. In Sagres's wandlight, the signs of age were unmistakable. Cracks in the shell, fur largely gone, venom sacs blunted and slack. The large spider stared fearfully at the red glow of the wand, then swept its cloudy eyes over the ruined guards and the piled bones before fixing its gaze on Sagres. The fear in those eyes made the kestrel uneasy. "Powerful wizard," Aragog croaked, his voice like dry leaves rubbing together, each word punctuated by hard gasps. "Please, spare me." His abdomen shuddered. A swollen venom sac glowed faintly at the end, sickly and eerie. "I know why you have come. The venom, I can give it to you. I only ask that you spare me and my remaining offspring." His pleading gaze turned to the edge of the chamber, where several pairs of emerald eyes trembled in the gloom. "It can speak?" Nightingale's voice wavered for the first time. She gripped her wand more tightly. "This is impossible. Class XXXX magical creatures cannot be tamed, let alone taught human speech." Aragog let out a dry, bitter hiss like a broken bellows carrying a wry, hopeless smile. Yes, young witch, normally impossible, but I am different. My name is Aragog. I was raised by a half-giant boy in a warm cupboard in a castle called Hogwarts." "Hagrid?" The name burst from the kestrel's lips, and at once the image of the perpetually smiling gamekeeper, always oddly fond of dangerous beasts, filled her mind. Aragog's great head trembled. A flicker of something like longing passed through his cloudy eyes. "Rubus Hagrid, my friend. He gave me my name, gave me warm food, and taught me your tongue. He believed in me, even when I was cast out into this forest." The spider's voice was full of desolate nostalgia, a sadness born of being banished by the world. Sagres listened without changing his expression. The wand in his hand stayed leveled at Aragog. The red glow at its tip did not dim. "A touching story," he said evenly. "But it doesn't change the fact that you and your brood built these mountains of corpses with your poisonous fangs, nor that they attacked us." Aragog's enormous body shuddered. "Survival, wizard," the old spider rasped. "Forest law, the strong take from the weak. His protest came out thin and breathless, voice losing strength as he spoke. Centaur, they see us as prey. Conflict is unavoidable. As for the offense against you, I apologize. My greedy young smelled powerful magic. I like the sound of the strong take from the weak, Sagres cut in, calm and untroubled. It means I don't need to invent excuses for what I've done tonight. He stepped forward. The red light from his wand played over Aragog's ancient carapace. Hand over every drop of venom. His voice was cold and flat. Don't try my patience, old spider. I can see your life force is nearly spent, but I won't hesitate to snuff it out myself and extract what I need from your corpse. The cave fell into a silence so complete it felt like a weight. Fear and humiliation flashed in Aragog's mottled compound eyes and then melted into utter despair. He knew when a wizard did not bluff. The ruthlessness in Sagres' gaze was more terrifying than any predator. A low, pained hiss crawled from the spider, as if squeezed from his rotting chest. His abdomen twitched violently. A thick, barbed stinger slowly extended, its tip gleaming a cold, oily black. Dark, viscous venom oozed from it, smelling sharp and fishy. Each drop drew a sticky thread through the air as it fell. Nightingale stepped forward without hesitation. She produced a crystal vial carved with countless runes along its inner surface and guided the venom into it with her wand. Throughout the process, Sagres' wand never wavered from Aragog's head, while Kestrel kept a nervous watch over the cave's shadows. When the last precious drop slid into the vial, Nightingale sealed the mouth. A faint magical glow flared inside the glass, evidence that the venom's potency and activity were being preserved. Only then did Sagres slowly lower his wand, though the air around him remained oppressive. He walked to stand before the great spider. Size meant nothing. His icy gaze made the ancient creature tremble to its very core. "For Hagrid's pathetic kindness," Sagres said evenly, "and for this gift of yours, I will not kill you." He bent slightly, and a blue arc of electricity snapped from his wand, scorching Aragog's wrinkled carapace. Flesh sizzled, a charred mark blackened the shell, and the tang of burnt hair and meat filled the air. "But you'd better control your offspring," he continued without heat. "If any of your descendants regard my students, my companions, or me as prey." He fixed the spider with a gaze that promised ruin. "I will come back. When I do, this forest will no longer echo with the hissing of Acromantula. There will be only silence. Do you understand?" Aragog shook with a fresh wave of terror. Pain flared from the burnt patch as if a promise of death had been made real. Understand, powerful wizard. I swear on my remaining life I will restrain them." Sagres inclined his head. "Good." He sheathed his wand and turned away, not looking back at the aging king of spiders. "Let's go." They retraced their bloody steps, leaving behind Aragog's ragged gasps and the faint skittering of young spiders in the dark. Kestrel couldn't help glancing back. In the moonlight, the massive hunched body seemed pitiful and desolate. Those clouded compound eyes still looked for a moment as if they held a lingering fondness for Hagrid. Her chest softened, and she murmured, "He looks a little." Nightingale paused but did not turn. Sagres stopped and faced Kestrel directly. The cool, measured look made her involuntarily pull in her shoulders. "Pitiful?" he said. "If this had been any other wizard tonight," Sagres said flatly, "that pitiful old spider would not have hesitated to order its young to tear them apart. Among those piles of bones you saw there might be curious Hogsmeade residents or an Auror on patrol." Kestrel's face went white. Nightingale finally turned as well. Moonlight from a crack in the cave ceiling washed her profile. "Arisa," she said quietly to Kestrel, "you have to understand. His only friend is Hagrid. To other humans," she pointed her wand at a few fresh skeletons, "they are simply food." Sagres flicked his wand once. Silver light shimmered, and thick webs peeled away from the wall to reveal what lay behind them. Thousands of egg sacs hung swollen and clustered. Each was as large as a pumpkin and translucent enough that writhing spiderlings could be seen inside. "Acromantula have no natural predators in the Forbidden Forest," he said as he walked on. "Hagrid has kept him here for only a few decades, and the population has already reached into the tens of thousands. Yet the Ministry looks the other way." He smiled without warmth. "It won't be long before some of these spiders wander out of the forest and start attacking the people of Hogsmeade." A chill ran through Kestrel. "But How could Professor Dumbledore allow this? She began. Albus Dumbledore, Sagres interrupted softly, sometimes misplaces his kindness. Nightingale squeezed Kestrel's trembling shoulder. Come, she said. The venom we took tonight, once brewed into a healing potion, will save many lives. As they left the cave, Kestrel stole one last look. Under the moon, Aragog crawled back toward his cocoon. The softness had gone from his gaze. There was nothing now but the indifferent stare of a beast. Understanding settled over Kestrel like cold steel. She forced herself to put away whatever pity she felt. Her hand stopped trembling. They walked out through the forest, the darkness thinning the farther they went. Nightingale's wand light picked a path through the twisted trunks. The shadows of gnarled branches seemed less threatening by its beam. Watch your step, Nightingale warned. There's a patch of leech vines ahead. Kestrel looked down. A network of dark red vines lay like veins over the leaf litter, moving so slowly they seemed almost still. Sagres waved his hand, and a pale fire raven circled down. The vines recoiled at once, shrinking away. Leech vines were everywhere in the forbidden forest, and Kestrel brightened at the sight. She squatted and peered closely. May I collect some samples? She asked eagerly. Professor Sprout said leech vine sap can be used for tranquilizers and in drawing magic circles. Be quick, Sagres said. He glanced up at the canopy, which kept the sky blocked in a tangle of branches. We should be out of here before dawn. Kestrel set to cutting and bundling with cheerful diligence. The conversation turned to other matters as they walked. Nicholas Flamel returned to Beauxbatons a while ago, didn't he? Sagres asked casually. Nightingale thought a moment. Yes, he and Madame Maxime were negotiating what to do with his estate. Seems they've finally decided to stop using the Philosopher's Stone to prolong their lives, Sagres said with something like feeling. Over 600 years can't keep going forever. Kestrel, snipping a vine with a cutting charm and stowing it in her satchel, looked puzzled. Did the stone stop working? It isn't the stone's fault, Sagres replied. It's them. I've seen him at the end of his life. Nightingale shook her head. Their senses dull, touch fades, their bodies are broken and hard to keep. Oh, Kestrel packed another small bundle, then said offhandedly, do you think he might be faking his death to slip away and start over with a new body and a new identity? Sagres and Nightingale exchanged a look that held more meaning than words. Neither answered. Chapter 154. Visiting Hagrid's House. You could try to figure out how Nicholas Flamel uses the Philosopher's Stone to make the elixir of life, Sagres said. It might be useful later. Nightingale nodded. The person who needed that knowledge most in Bronze Feather was Thunderbird, the Dean of Ilvermorny, who was already over 100. Tell me if you need any help, Sagres added casually, his tone calm. There are probably a lot of people eyeing his inheritance. Do we have to get involved in that too? Kestrel asked. She had finished packing and carefully tucked her travel bag beneath her robe. Sagres shook his head. All we want is the method of using the Philosopher's Stone, nothing else. He walked on, speaking as he went. Besides, as long as Nicholas Flamel donates his research intact to his alma mater, Valus will have access. What we need to watch for are people with other motives who try to rob him halfway through. That's true, Nightingale said softly to Kestrel. Both he and his wife are still alive. It's too early to worry about it. Suddenly, heavy footsteps and the distinct panting of a dog came from nearby. Who's there? A booming voice cut through the undergrowth, and Hagrid's burly figure pushed out of the bushes, carrying a swinging oil lamp and followed by Fang. Oh, it's you! Hagrid's eyes widened, the lamplight dancing on his unruly beard. Professor Greengrass, and the two of you, why are you wandering the Forbidden Forest at this hour? Sagres inclined his head a little, calm. We're gathering some materials, Hagrid. Fang nosed forward, sniffing at the hem of Kestrel's robe with a wet nose, and then sneezed loudly. He'd clearly caught the scent of acromantula. Hagrid's surprise melted into worry, his brows knitted. Wait, you didn't go to Aragog's lair? Yes, Sagres admitted openly. We needed some fresh venom. You weren't hurt, were you? Hagrid's face went red. And you didn't hurt Aragog, did you? He's very old, not in great health, and he's safe, Sagres said evenly, although his offspring tried to make us their supper. Guilt and concern crossed Hagrid's face. Aragog's actually very placid. if you talk to him properly. Placid, Kestrel cut in. There are piles of bones in his lair as high as a small hill. Hagrid scratched his massive hands awkwardly. That couldn't be helped. The forest has its own rules. Don't worry, he's fine, Nightingale told him. We only took some venom. Hagrid looked at her with gratitude, then brightened. Why not come to my place for a bit? Have some hot tea and a bit of what I've baked. You must be hungry after walking all night. Sagres didn't refuse and signaled for the others to follow as he walked beside Hagrid. By the way, he said conversationally, how did you get Aragog to talk? That's remarkable in magical biology. Hagrid's face lit up. Ah, that took ages. He waved his hands excitedly. I kept him in a cupboard at the castle, read fairy tales for little wizards to him every day, talked to him, took 2 whole years for him to squeak out his first word. Hagrid! The big man's eyes shone. Nightingale and Kestrel exchanged incredulous looks. The light in Hagrid's face dimmed, and his voice dropped. Later, something happened at the castle. There was an attack. A student died. They couldn't find who did it, and everyone suspected Aragog. He clenched his fists. But I knew he didn't do it. I swear, Aragog would never hurt a student. He knows that's wrong. What happened then? Hagrid breathed in, disappointment heavy in him. Aragog ran off into the Forbidden Forest. Headmaster Dippet, he couldn't stand the pressure from the ministry and the governors, and he expelled me. His voice trembled with helplessness. Fang seemed to sense his master's mood and rubbed his head against Hagrid's leg. Hagrid steadied himself, then went on with a touch of nostalgia. I couldn't leave him alone, so I spent months searching the forests of Albania and finally found a female acromantula, Mozag. I brought her back so Aragog wouldn't be lonely. Sagres shook his head gently. In a way, you're remarkable. There was an odd undertone to his words. You've managed to turn an extremely dangerous creature into a talking, if still dangerous, creature. Hagrid hurried to defend himself. But he's never hurt a Hogwarts student on purpose. Who knows, Sagres said calmly. There are at least a few human skeletons of various ages in his lair. Hagrid flinched, staring at his boots. I'll go and see Aragog, he muttered. Fang whined uneasily and tucked his tail. I don't think that's necessary, Sagres said. We've already come to an understanding with him. They reached Hagrid's crooked little wooden hut. Beauxbaton's Abraxan horses were tethered nearby, and a few barrels of fire whiskey sat by the door. The 4 people and the dog stepped inside. The warmth of the fire hit them, along with the familiar, odd mix of smells that always seemed to live in Hagrid's home. Hagrid clumsily lifted a huge copper kettle from the embers and poured each of them a steaming, strong cup of tea. The rough ceramic mugs looked comically small in his hands. Professor, Hagrid said carefully, holding his own mug, about that Umbridge business. Don't worry, Sagres replied. If the ministry is sensible, they'll keep quiet. Hagrid's face broke into a relieved grin. I knew you'd manage. Hermione was just talking about it with me yesterday. He produced some freshly baked cauldron cakes and handed them around. The conversation drifted to the dueling tournament. A dueling arena's a great idea, Hagrid said. Students will learn a lot more than from books. It serves a purpose like Quidditch, Sagres said, sipping his tea. Even if they don't learn much, it gives energetic young witches and wizards a lawful outlet. That's right, Hagrid agreed, nodding vigorously. Then, suddenly bashful, he rubbed his large hands together. Professor, could I apply for a dueling badge? He asked like a big child hoping for a sweet. No problem, Sagres answered evenly. The headmaster and many professors have applied. It's just that we'll need some small prizes for the winners later. Leave it to me, Hagrid boomed, slapping his chest with pride. Anything I have here, just ask. Nightingale's eyes swept the hut and paused on a corner where various rare magical materials lay. Are those dried glow-in-the-dark mushrooms? She asked, pointing at a pile of purplish-black fungi. Huh? Those? Hagrid glanced over. They glow at night, very pretty. Hallucinogenic? Nah, they just make you sleepy if you eat them, and you sleep especially well. The group's expressions shifted subtly. It seemed Hagrid's half-giant blood made him almost immune to things that could be toxic or dangerous to ordinary wizards. Could you give me some? Nightingale asked. I can trade you a good potion of insight. Hey, what kind of trade are you talking about? Hagrid hurried over. You're Professor Greengrass's friend, and you saved my life in the Forbidden Forest last year." He shoved a thick cloth bag toward her, tipped a mound of purplish-black dried mushrooms into it, and held it out. "Take them all. If it's not enough, I'll go and pick more." Once the mushrooms were bundled, Hagrid's voice dropped, and he grew awkward, his huge frame suddenly constrained. "It's just one thing, Professor Nixia. Madame Maxime, she—" Nightingale's clear, cool eyes watched him, a flicker of understanding passing through them. She tilted her head as if to confirm his meaning. "You want her owl post address?" she said evenly. No, not at all," Hagrid blurted, then quickly reddened. "I just wanted to ask about her. Of course." He lowered his voice to a whisper, rubbing his hands nervously. "If you could give me her owl's address, that would be even better." A faint curve passed across Nightingale's mouth. She neither mocked his clumsiness nor pressed him further. She simply nodded. From an inner pocket of her robe, she produced a small silver-gray leather notebook and a slender quill that looked as if it had been plucked from some black bird. Under Kestrel's curious stare, she opened the notebook, tapped the quill once on the page, and the tip began to write. "The Beauxbatons headmistress's private owl post is handled by her most trusted secretary. Address it, Beauxbatons Academy of Magic, Pyrenees Mountains, headmistress's office. Write for the personal attention of Madame Olympe Maxime. The owl's name is Silverfrost. When sending, it's best to write 'Please forward' in French." She tore the page free, folded it into a neat triangle, and handed it to Hagrid, who still looked stunned. "Here you are, Mr. Hagrid," she said. Her tone had its usual cool clarity, but there was a touch more warmth. "Madame Maxime's address. I wish you pleasant correspondence." Hagrid pinched the scrap between two thick fingers and beamed so broadly his eyes narrowed to slits. "Thank you so much, Professor Nixia. You're—" He trailed off, nearly incoherent with excitement, his bulk trembling. Kestrel had to bite her lip to stop a laugh, shoulders shaking. Sagres set down his teacup and straightened his robe. "Hagrid, to keep you from making a mess of things, I have some advice," he said. Hagrid carefully tucked the note away, eyes bright. "Really, Professor Greengrass?" Sagres nodded. "First, a few core principles. 1. Sincerity is your greatest asset, but it needs packaging. Learn to present your feelings in a way Madame Maxime can accept." "Sincerity. Packaged expression," Hagrid repeated like a student. 2. Understanding is better than proclaiming. Say less about how much you like her or how similar you are. Observe more, what she needs, what she cares about. Sagres' voice was steady. "Okay, don't say like, observe more." The third point, his expression sobered, is to respect her dignity and boundaries at all times. Madame Maxime prizes decorum. You must uphold her pride, especially in public. "Understood. Respect her, uphold her decorum." Hagrid nodded vehemently. 4th, patience. Madame Maxime won't be won over quickly. Show steady, lasting respect and attention rather than a sudden, overwhelming onslaught. "I am very patient," Hagrid said earnestly. Finally, Sagres glanced at Hagrid's distinctive coat. "You should improve your presentation. No need to become someone else, but pay attention to neatness and suitable attire. It's a form of respect." "Wear nicer clothes? Are my moleskin coat and furry suit okay?" Hagrid asked hopefully. "Not quite," Sagres replied calmly. "I suggest Madame Malkin's or Twilfit and Tatting's in Diagon Alley. Get 2 well-fitting suits and some formal robes." "Oh, all right." Hagrid looked a little disappointed but nodded. "Respect is most important." Nightingale added, "Madame Maxime has spent her life overcoming prejudice and proving herself as a witch and a headmistress. Anything that makes her feel crude or inferior is absolutely taboo." "Valus is right," Sagres agreed. "So in any public setting, and even in private, until you reach a very deep level of trust, never use terms like giant or half-blood. That is a red line. Any occasion, any time." The smile fell from Hagrid's face. He opened his mouth as if to say something, then closed it and nodded heavily, his expression suddenly grave and nervous. I remember. Red line. Absolutely no mention. Not a single word." He sounded as if he were taking an oath. The rules had been many, and confusion creased Hagrid's brow again. Nightingale had anticipated that. She stopped the quill and tore off a page covered in neat handwriting, handing it to him. "In short," she said, "think of her as you would the most delicate unicorn. Approach with gentleness, respect, and the right amount of distance." "Like caring for a unicorn," Hagrid murmured. the image settling over him. The confusion melted away, and a look of deep understanding took its place. "I understand." Hagrid accepted the note with a grateful smile. "Well then, we've had tea and settled everything. I should get back to the castle. I have class this morning." Sagres swept a final glance over the jubilant Hagrid, then rose to see him off. When they pushed open the little wooden door, the cool morning air rushed in, carrying the fresh scent of earth and grass. The sun had risen over the horizon, bathing Hogwarts' ancient towers in gold. From the cabin behind them came Hagrid's excited chatter and Fang's glad barks as they headed back toward the castle. 157. Zhanghe Lake Ice Obstacle Race and Magic Contest. The Triwizard Dueling Tournament had ended, and the three ancient schools of magic had all achieved their aims. After talks among the heads, they agreed to make the United Dueling Championship an annual event. While many Hogwarts students still slept, the guests from Beauxbatons and Durmstrang had already packed and quietly departed at dawn, watched over by their heads and professors. The castle settled back into its usual quiet. Sagres resumed his lessons with his customary steadiness. In their free hours, the students hurled themselves into dueling, burning off energy and chasing points on the dueling leaderboard. Professor McGonagall was not pleased. Quidditch practice time had been noticeably sacrificed. Spring inched forward. Grass pushed up through the earth, the forbidden forest filled with new leaves, and Kestrel's once popular snowman battle royale fizzled out with the melt. Kestrel, however, did not rest. She invented one game after another, students leaping from the astronomy tower and casting on the way down, others tunneling underground like gnomes to undermine enemy fortifications. The pupils complained incessantly and loved it equally. One day, Kestrel came to Sagres, practically bubbling with excitement, and made an odd request. "You want me to refreeze the Black Lake?" Sagres asked, expressionless. Kestrel nodded so eagerly she pecked the air like a chick. "Why?" Sagres was concise. Kestrel launched into an animated pitch for a Black Lake Ice Obstacle Race and Magic Combat Championship, sketching out the course and the challenges. Sagres listened with a frown, enduring her almost fantastical ideas, and finally fixed her with a look that seemed to study some curious beast. Kestrel shifted under his gaze. "Is there a problem?" she asked. Sagres considered. "What is the purpose of this event? What abilities are you aiming to train?" Kestrel's eyes darted. Maybe comprehensive skills, on-the-spot adaptation, precise spell work, creating chaos, problem-solving." Sagres found it not entirely absurd. Her whimsical lessons had yielded surprising results before. After a pause, he nodded, though reluctantly. The next noon, they stood at the Black Lake. Early spring wind still bit, raking through Sagres's black robes. Kestrel's eyes glittered as she stared at the placid surface. "Ready?" Sagres asked flatly, like someone inquiring about the weather. "Anytime." Kestrel nodded like a metronome. Sagres drew his wand with fluid, practiced motions. The tip steadied on the lake, and a powerful, tightly controlled swell of magic gathered. "Ice, 3 feet deep," he intoned. There was no thunderous noise, only a pervasive, chilling crackle, snap, snap, snap. Icy blue air rolled out from his wand like a rushing plague, fast and relentless. The Black Lake did not boil, it solidified. Where the cold air touched, water flipped into ice in an instant. The surface did not freeze slowly. It felt as if some invisible hand had slammed a pause button. In a handful of breaths, the water near the shore had been conquered, becoming a smooth, mirror-white plain. The ice thickened, its color deepening from clear to a solid, bluish-white, spreading steadily toward the center. A few merpeople had been sunning on the rocks, silver-green hair splayed across warm stone, tails lazily flicking in the shallows. An elderly merperson with a shell necklace was dozing in the sunlight when the cold swept over them. "Gurgle?" She snapped awake. "What's happening?" Horror widened her eyes as the water around them turned into a hard shell. She tried to dive back in, but the ice advanced too fast, and she slammed onto the frozen surface. "Ah!" she cried. The others met the same fate, scrambling and sputtering in panic, bubbling angry noises as their silver tails were exposed to the chill. The elder gurgled frantically. "Gurgle, winter again? We can't go back. Who will help us?" On the shore, Hogwarts students watched with stunned faces. "Huh?" A third-year Hufflepuff rubbed his eyes. "Did I imagine it? How is the Black Lake frozen already? It was liquid yesterday." Professor Greengrass did it all by himself, a Ravenclaw pointed out, nodding toward the tall figure on the shore, and the cold aura still faint at his wand's tip. That was incredible. Awesome, the Weasley twins whistled, laughing as they watched the merpeople flounder on the ice. Look at them, sunbathing and can't get back, huh? What new trick is Professor Chang up to this time? Hermione Granger drew her cloak tight and frowned at Kestrel, who was beside Sagres, practically effervescent with excitement. This is ridiculous. She shook her head. At that moment, Ron trudged out of the castle, drawn by the noise, juggling papers and muttering about homework. He stared at the lake, then went pale as if the world had shifted. What? He rubbed his eyes, pinched his arm hard. Oof, this isn't a dream, is it? He gaped at the vast sheet of ice glinting in the sunlight. Who can tell me if I've lost a year or if I slept until next winter? This was water yesterday. Harry, Hermione, do you see this? Hermione rolled her eyes. Wake up, Ron. It's Professor Greengrass. He froze the lake at Professor Chang's request for her ice skating obstacle course, or whatever she's calling it. A new game? Ron brightened, but Hermione's severe look wiped the smile away. He straightened and said, That's not right, as if protesting on principle. Harry only stared at the merpeople slapping helplessly at the ice, a fierce admiration in his voice. No matter what, that sight is extraordinary. Sagres ignored the commotion and kept his wand steady until the last patch of water yielded. The whole Black Lake had become a vast white plain, throwing back the morning sun in a blinding sheet. He slowly lowered his wand, and the intense cold ebbed away. He glanced at Kestrel, who was nearly vibrating with excitement, and said in his flat tone, There you go, your ice rink. He put his wand away and turned to leave. Kestrel stared out over the vast white world of ice and snow, watching the merpeople bobbing near the reef, a brilliant smile spreading across her face. Fantastic, she said. She flicked her wand down toward the frozen surface, and with a silver pop, a pair of ice skates materialized on the soles of her shoes. Kestrel cheered and glided toward the reef. Don't worry, I'm here to help, she called. She pointed her wand at the lake and sent a drill-like surge of magic into the ice. A neat, steaming hole opened where the merpeople could dive back into the water. Several of them scrambled through, the elder even popping his head up for one last look. The merpeople watched astonished and bewildered, but Kestrel paid them no mind. Her whole attention was already on building the course. Her wand danced like a conductor's baton. With crisp incantations and flickering light, a winding, mischievous track took shape across the frozen field. It began at the shore by the castle, snaked across the lake, and vanished near a cluster of large bubbles frozen under the distant ice. Kestrel had filled the track with carefully designed little surprises, seemingly flat stretches of ice that would bulge into small hummocks, enough to throw someone off balance at speed. Crystalline pillars that could blast out thick white mist to obscure vision. Sections charmed with extreme slipperiness, so control became nearly impossible. Deceptive patches that split open into shallow, soaking holes, safe but humiliating. Narrow swinging ice bridges that spanned ravines and wobbled as you crossed. The rules were simple. Glide the course and reach the finish line. The true point, though, was that students were encouraged to use magic while they skated, both to help themselves and to hinder others. During a run, you could cast spells like Ice Rise to raise the ice into a small slope for a speed boost, Smooth Track to flatten dangerous bumps, Bridge Generation to create a quick, sturdy bridge across a gap, Lubricate Ice to make a surface treacherously slick behind you, or Roughen Ice to turn the path ahead of an opponent into a jarring mess. The ultimate trick was the emergency stop. Cast Stop and Stand Still, or Impedimenta, before you pass the boundary, and use the spell's friction to come to a safe, maybe even stylish, halt. Professor Lumina, what is this for? A student shouted from the crowd that had gathered at the edge of the Black Lake. More and more wizards were craning their necks to watch Kestrel working the ice. Ha! New teaching content, Kestrel called back, turning to face them, eyes bright with excitement. Ice skating competition? Someone guessed. Not just ice skating. She waved the idea away with an exaggerated flourish, then strolled over to the watching students and tapped her throat with her wand. Sonorous, her voice swelled, clear and loud across the cold air. This is to train you to adapt on the fly, she said. Imagine you're in battle and the enemy can't defeat you but tries to run. What do you do? A few students blinked. Huh? Pursue them, Kestrel barked. Then, theatrically, but what if you can't beat them? What do you do then? The students, catching on, called back together. Run! Wrong! She snapped, holding up a finger. That's called foolish running. The art of retreat, strategy, is about changing the ground beneath your feet. She stalked back and forth, hands on her hips. Whether it's building bridges for a chance to escape or laying traps to slow your pursuers, these are life-saving skills on a real battlefield. This is rehearsal. A murmur of understanding rippled through them. Ah! You won't learn it by listening to me lecture. Kestrel swept her gaze over the crowd and pointed, calling out more than a dozen students by name, Hermione among them, pulled along by Harry and Ron who had been watching, and sent them to the starting line. Practice makes perfect, she said with a sly smile. Hermione looked reluctant, but obediently took her place with the others. Kestrel ran through the rules crisply, then grinned and flicked her wand. The start is a little special. I'll give you a push. With a graceful wave, the gathered students felt an irresistible shove from behind. Before they could cry out, they were launched forward like stones from a slingshot with a whoosh. The quiet of the ice shattered. Screams, laughter, and shouted spells filled the air as the course erupted into a magical obstacle race. Kestrel rose from the ice, her figure briefly blazing into the shape of a crimson phantom bird as she flew low over the track, overseeing the chaos with a stopwatch in one hand and a scoreboard in the other. A Hufflepuff first year hit a slippery patch at the start and spun like a top, ice shards spraying her face. She blasted herself with a quick cleaning charm, clambered up, cheeks burning, and carried on. A confident Gryffindor senior invoked Ice Rise to vault an obstacle, but misjudged the angle and the ramp became a wall. He collided with it and skidded across the ice like a flattened frog. Two Ravenclaws rushed a swinging bridge at once. One of them, grinning, cast lubricate on the bridge behind them. Both slipped and tumbled into a heap, pulling a couple of sneaking students down with them. Impedimenta! Wait, not there! Cried a nervous Slytherin as she misread the finish line. Her breaking spell shot across a lane and smacked an adjacent competitor like an invisible rubber wall. The victim flipped spectacularly and landed in a ridiculous pose, drawing roars of laughter. Someone yelled, "Smooth, quick!" toward a mist-shrouded bump, but the smoothing charm went astray and instead roughened a good section, jarring the caster so violently her wand nearly flew from her hand. It was a magical, chaotic version of a kart race, ice rising and sinking, bridges appearing and vanishing, spells thrown like improvised weapons. Competitors skated like duelists, casting to clear their paths, lay traps, or stave off imminent faceplants. Above it all, Kestrel circled, stopwatch ticking, scoreboard updating with gleeful ruthlessness. Hit ice hump -1, friendly fire -2, spectacular fall +1. One moment she whistled in approval at a near miss past a bottomless hole. The next she mercilessly mocked someone who had toppled because of their own miscast. The lake rang with laughter and the rattle of magic. The lesson, as Kestrel had promised, was being learned in the most entertaining way possible. Chapter 158, Unexpected Hermione. She's definitely going to be the first one out. Before the competition began, Ron munched on a chicken pot pie he'd snuck from the kitchens and made a muffled prediction. Hermione can't even ride a broomstick properly, let alone Merlin's socks. Harry followed Ron's suddenly wide eyes and saw Hermione already pushed out into the arena. She had flicked her wand in an instant, hovered for a breath like a small bird, and then, robes fluttering, landed cleanly on the ice while 5 or 6 students around her tumbled into a heap. "Levitation charm," Harry blurted, nudging Ron. "She used it on the soles of her shoes." Ron's mouth froze half open. "Did she plan this from the start?" Harry pointed. "Look, she's heading for the mist." While other contestants plowed about in the fog like headless chickens, Hermione dropped her center of gravity. A sparkle of spell light flashed from her wand, and the ice ahead of her smoothed out as if polished. "She's not going to," Ron began, but Hermione had already used the momentum to slide. Her whole body lowered until she was almost parallel to the ground, chestnut curls skimming the surface, and she shot through the narrow gap beneath the mist with a whoosh. The crowd erupted. "Merlin's beard," Ron gasped. "That looked like a Quidditch maneuver." Just beyond the mist, the track split. The left fork ran straight over a field of ice humps meant to trip contestants. The right required crossing a wide fissure by way of a narrow, swinging ice bridge. A Slytherin lunged for the bridge, but Hermione didn't hesitate. She jabbed her wand at the edge of the crack. Ice bridge creation! A new span sprouted closer to her side. Without waiting for it to settle, she used her sliding speed to make a small hop, landed in the center, and slid across. The Slytherin lost his balance as the bridge rocked and went down with a splash. Laughter rippled through the stands. "Cheater!" Harry hissed, grabbing Ron's shoulder. They saw a Ravenclaw boy trying to be subtle, pointing his wand at the ice ahead of Hermione. Before Harry could shout a warning, Hermione, like she had eyes in the back of her head, launched a swift counterspell. The boy's feet slipped and he landed in a drift. Beautiful. Ron punched the railing, pie forgotten. When did she learn that? "She's barely had a rest lately," Harry said with a grin. "She's practiced every day." The trickiest section came just before the finish, a patch meant to send contestants twisting and flipping. While others fought the slippery chaos, Hermione conjured a series of small ice ramps. She weaved between them, and instead of slowing, she gained speed. "She's using the obstacles to accelerate." Harry sprang to his feet. "No, she's going to crash!" "Slow down," Ron cried. Hermione thundered toward the boundary at alarming speed. At the last second, her wand erupted in blinding light, and the ice ahead of her folded into a miniature roller coaster, a tight spiral slide. She hopped onto it without hesitation and rode 2 compact circuits, bleeding off most of her momentum. Then her wand flashed again. "Stopping charm! Impedimenta!" A sharp screech echoed through the arena as ice chips scattered. 2 white streaks scored the surface, and Hermione ground to a halt, robes billowing just an inch from the boundary line. She stood there for a heartbeat, composed, and then flicked her wand. Cleaning charm. The ice chips vanished. The silence broke into deafening cheers. Students by the lake clapped wildly. When did Hermione become so-so? Cool? Exactly. Cool. Perfect execution. Textbook. Kestrel swooped down and landed before Hermione, patting her shoulder with undisguised admiration. "Splendid, Miss Granger. First place. Gryffindor gets 20 points. Gryffindor erupted again. Hermione, cheeks flushed, hugged her scattered books to her chest and slipped away from the crush, embarrassed by the attention. "Hey, the champion ran off," Seamus called, pointing at her retreating back. Harry and Ron exchanged a glance and followed. Back at the infirmary, a few more scratched and winded students had been added to the congregation. When another gaggle of laughing, injured contestants pushed open the door, Madame Pomfrey's hand trembled on a potion vial. Seeing them, a familiar dread crept up. "Let me guess, Professor Lumina's Defense Against the Dark Arts class again?" Several nodded. With a flick, Pomfrey lined up a row of small purple potions on the table, and 7th-year medical volunteers leapt to distribute them. "It was an ice event this time, madam," a Gryffindor with ice chips in his hair reported. "Way better than the tunnel warfare. At least you don't get muddy." Pomfrey snorted and turned to Alaric, who was organizing bandages. "Fetch more Dittany from storage and tell Dumbledore that if next month's budget goes over." She paused meaningfully. "He knows who to blame." Since Professor Lumina's arrival, the infirmary had been busier. The professor's lessons often had unintended side effects. Thankfully, a few senior students helped Pomfrey keep up. In the castle corridor, Hermione was caught by Harry and Ron before she could slip away. "Why are you running?" Ron panted. "You're the champion. They're even talking about a little celebration for you in the common room." Hermione hugged her books tighter, ears burning. "That's too much. It was just a track test." "Too much?" Harry raised an eyebrow. "You conjured a spiral roller coaster on the ice and nobody came close." "It's not as amazing as you make it sound," Hermione said. "I only learned basic ice skating at a muggle rink when I was little." "Seriously," Ron leaned in, awed. "You could join the school Quidditch team now." "No, totally different," Hermione countered, shaking her head, strands of hair swinging. "I observed the course first and planned my moves. Quidditch is improvising around bludgers and opponents. And," her voice softened, "you know my broomstick. I'm not very good at it." Ron shrugged, then brightened. But speaking of flying, did you notice Professor Lumina earlier? She didn't use a broom. She just went whoosh like that. That's a lot like the magic Professor Greengrass used, Hermione said, unusually certain. Professor Greengrass? Which magic? Ron asked. The magic he used when he first appeared in the Forbidden Forest last year, Hermione replied. The shadow looked different, but the core principle is definitely the same. It does sound like they might know each other, Ron said slowly. No wonder Mr. Loctus is so familiar with her. Do you think we'd ever learn that kind of magic? Harry asked suddenly. I've never felt free flying without a broom. It must be incredible. Oh, really? Ron grinned and nudged Harry. I remember you falling 50 feet off a broom in that match. This should feel just like that. Harry, tender on the subject, laughed despite himself. Get lost, Ron. That was awful. I'm talking about controlled flying. But seriously, Hermione, Harry said, his smile fading, eyes bright with hope. Do you think we could learn that magic? Hermione set the thick book into a small bottle, her face serious. That sounds like very advanced magic. It might even be unique to the professor. He probably won't teach it to just anyone. No chance at all? Ron asked. Maybe Professor Lumina would teach us? Hermione's eyes swept over Harry and Ron, full of longing. I don't think it's likely, but you can try. Listen to this, such grand ambitions. A cold, mocking voice cut from the shadowed archway. Pansy Parkinson stepped out with her arms folded, flanked by several Slytherins. Blaise Zabini lounged against the stone wall, and Crabbe, a hulking presence, blocked half the corridor. Someone who scraped by and used muggle tricks actually thinks she deserves the professor's secrets. Isn't that right? Zabini added lazily, a fake smile on his face. Granger, your little cleverness is all show. Do you really think sliding around on ice will make the professor notice you? Harry stepped forward and put himself between Hermione and the Slytherins. Mind your own business. If you've got nothing better to do, go practice some spells, if you still remember how to cast them. Showing off, Potter? The group turned to him. You're always so meddlesome. Hermione's face blanched slightly, but she held Pansy's glare without flinching. How I perform is the professor's concern. What I want to learn is my choice, and it's none of your business. So noble. Pansy clutched her chest in mock outrage, and the Slytherins laughed. Has Miss Know-It-All forgotten her manners? Shut up. Ron flushed red and stepped forward to stand beside Hermione. Hermione's talent is real. Everyone at Hogwarts knows that. Please stay away, Weasley. Pansy sneered, taking a half step back. Are you, like Potter, just trying to look brave? The Slytherins laughed harder. Ron's face went an even brighter red. He looked ready to rush them, but Harry and Hermione held him back. Calm down, Ron. Let me hit her, Ron snarled. I don't care. No wand. I'll... Beat who to death? Me? Pansy looked triumphant, turning to the others. Did you hear that? Weasley's going to kill me. Crabbe and the rest roared. Ron started to calm only when Harry slid his dueling badge into Ron's hand. A tacit reminder. What do you want? A duel? Harry asked coldly. Then apply to the professor. The three of us can't attack students ranked below us. What did you say? Crabbe took a step forward, his knuckles cracking. Say that again. Want to fight? Harry lifted his chin. But tell me, do the dueling points of all 6 of you together even add up to half of ours? I don't think so. Ron spat, drawing his wand. Tension tightened on both sides. Hermione reached out and pulled Harry and Ron back, voice softer. Let's go. They're all bark. None of them will actually start a fight. She had seen exactly what the Slytherins were after, provoking them into breaking the rules so the trio would be punished. The Slytherins' faces fell. None of them issued a formal challenge. Harry and Ron smirked. The 3 of them started to leave, but the Slytherins still blocked the corridor. Take another route. This one's blocked. Pansy taunted, stepping closer, the air around them chill. Especially unwelcome are mudbloods. Pansy, Zabini snapped warningly, cutting her off. Crabbe's grin tightened, but the words had been said. Ron's wand snapped up toward Pansy, trembling with fury. Harry's grip whitened on his wand. Hermione pressed her lips together, staring at Pansy with a cold, hard look. Say it, Hermione ordered, pushing past Harry and Ron and standing directly in front of Pansy, ignoring Crabbe's looming bulk. Say it again. Let me see what happens. Pansy's expression faltered, as if she remembered how Malfoy had been confined and changed. She snorted and turned away. Whatever. The group moved to leave, muttering. Hermione was faster. With a flick of her wrist, she sent her wand tip sweeping toward the 2 suits of armor flanking the corridor. They clanked to life and stepped between the Slytherins and the exit, cutting them off. "What are you doing?" Pansy screamed, trying to regain control. "Apologize." Hermione's voice was icy. "Apologize, or you'll regret it." "Regret from you?" Pansy sneered. Hermione didn't answer. She pointed her wand directly at Pansy and mouthed words so quickly they were almost silent. Pansy shrank back, startled. What did you do to me?" "You'll find out soon enough." Hermione said it coldly, then took Harry and Ron by the hands and forced them past the frozen 6 as the suits of armor still held them in place. After they'd gone a few paces, Ron couldn't help glancing back. "What did you do to her?" he asked urgently in a low voice. "Sleep deprivation." Hermione whispered. Both boys' mouths dropped open, and then they burst into amazed laughter. "Brilliant, Hermione." They both gave her thumbs up. "Make her not be able to close her eyes for 10 days, maybe 2 weeks. Let her taste it." Hermione lifted her chin, pulling them along as they disappeared around the corner. She remembered the last time she'd used sleep deprivation without knowing the counterspell, wakeful reprieve. She'd cast it rashly on all 3 of them, and within 3 days, they had all turned into hollow-eyed shadows, bloodshot, short-tempered, and on edge. Ron had smashed Neville's cauldron in potions class because Neville had brushed his sleeve. Harry had lost his temper with a bludger during Quidditch practice and nearly sent Fred's bat flying out of the stands. Even usually unflappable Hermione had snapped at Madame Pince in the library, scaring several first-years. Eventually, exhausted and humiliated, Hermione had dragged herself to Professor Greengrass and learned wakeful reprieve. After that, she became relentless in her studying. Harry and Ron would sneak a few stolen hours of sleep now and then, but Hermione, beyond what was absolutely necessary, refused to relax for a single moment.